Now, you may have heard of ChatGPT.
Stability AI.
Midjourney.
Anthropic.
Type in a request and it can write legal documents, software, even school essays. Type in a description of any picture you want, and boom.
All was done without anyone's consent, no credit, no compensation, no nothing.
And is a technology blurring the lines of creativity and pushing out human artists?
Some believe it will always lack the human quality.
Have you started to notice a lot of AI slop popping off in YouTube's algorithm?
That looks bad.
And now I have to compete against this thing, and it's devaluing my whole career.
What can governments do when big tech gets so big?
Should AI be able to get a copyright over the work that it produces?
The New York Times has filed a lawsuit in federal court.
Sarah Silverman and 2 authors.
They're suing Meta and OpenAI.
There are these companies profiting off of my name and my work.
A ChatGPT query uses nearly 10 times the electricity of a typical internet search.
Is AI going to help solve the climate crisis or make it worse?
In fact, the computing power required for AI is estimated to double.
Every tech company racing to implement some half-assed AI feature.
The AI will be able to do everything.
There will be some change required to the social contract.
We're hoping that it does things that surprise us.
1956, Dartmouth College. It's the height of the American experiment and suburban housewife amphetamine abuse. Mathematics professor John McCarthy organizes a summer workshop on the topic of thinking machines. He calls it the Dartmouth Summer Research Project on Artificial Intelligence. Nearly 70 years ago, in a time before cell phones or big data, before chairs even, this workshop is the first formal use of the term artificial intelligence. It's important to understand that, like a lot of the technological innovations that libertarians love to attribute to the beauty of American free markets, early innovations in AI started as Cold War-era government-funded military projects. Innovation does not, and has not, always needed the profit motive. But it's important to recognize the way technological development has often relied on unfounded hype. As the AI field grew in the 60s and 70s, researchers, motivated to procure more government funds, began to overpromise on the tech's capabilities.
I'm convinced that machines can and will think in our lifetime.
Sound familiar? The US government was interested in AI for its hypothetical ability to quickly translate between English and Russian. You know, for Cold War reasons. Researchers set out to develop machine translation, but it turns out that's actually kind of hard. Yet, researchers promised that it was possible, as long as the government kept funding their research.
I invented the term artificial intelligence. I invented it because we had to do something when we were trying to get money for a summer study.
Apparently, Dude Trust Me only works for so long before dudes stop trusting. Eventually, the field of AI garnered a horrible reputation for being associated with unkept promises. Tired of the lack of results, in the 70s and 80s, governments slashed funding for AI research. Even the term artificial intelligence itself became a dirty word in tech spheres. How did AI go from technological slur in the 70s to high-profit marketing term in the 2020s? How did we get chatbots like ChatGPT? The recent explosion of interest in AI emerged shortly after the release of models like ChatGPT and Midjourney. These are a set of technologies called generative AI. Generative AI predates the release of these models, but recent technological innovations have made these models a lot more sophisticated and accessible to the general public. For our purposes, just think of it as an algorithm that uses existing data to produce new data. Things like text, images, video, and more. In one sense, Gen AI is just another tool, right? Like any other tool, it can be used for good things, bad things, destruction, or creation. But in another sense, Gen AI came about at a particular moment in history, right at the edge of environmental apocalypse, in a polarized political culture, and wielded by actors with world historical intentions. So AI isn't just a tool, it's the site of powerful dichotomies. Tech bro versus anti-tech populist, big corporation versus independent creator, right versus left, capitalist consumption versus collective production. AI, especially generative AI, contains latent political and social problems. Some see it as an overhyped plagiarism machine that's destroying the environment. Others think it's going to lead to unlimited economic growth, requiring a restructuring of the social contract. How do we make sense of all of this? I'm not here to both sides the debate, as if the truth about AI lies somewhere in the middle. This is a moment that requires commitment, but there is a difference between the centrist fear of commitment and my problem, that the available commitments all kind of suck. But before I explain why, I need you, presumed AI skeptic, to listen carefully when I say that I am a transsexual communist who does creative work for a living. I am not a friend to the techno-fascists. I am exactly the demographic that they are trying to make disposable. But I'm afraid that if we aren't careful with how we critique the use and abuse of artificial intelligence, we might end up, as leftist philosopher Mark Fisher once warned, foreclosing the possibility of a technologized anti-capitalism. I fear that framing this debate as anti-tech versus pro-tech and handing the pro-tech position to the right wing is a generational blunder. Again, I need you to listen carefully, okay? I don't like big tech. I'm not here to promote a cryptocurrency. No Gen AI was used in the creation of this video. In fact, my videos have been used to train AI against my will. There are legitimate problems with the ways AI is being developed and implemented. And it's not as simple as doing the predictable leftist video essay thing that hand waves problems away by concluding that, actually, the real problem is capitalism. I mean, yeah, no shit, capitalism is the problem. Cuck-capitalism. We know this. The current system's incentive structures benefit an elite minority at the expense of the majority. I'm not here to waste your time belaboring that point. But we're stuck with unanswered questions that have kept the left and progressives in a state of constant defense, running aimlessly into the future, swinging a sword around with their eyes closed. What is it exactly that we're fighting for? What is it exactly that we should resist? What are we trying to build? What is foreclosed within this well-intentioned AI backlash? What types of futures are we abandoning in the race to counter AI hype? What regimes of private property are reinforced when AI training is called art theft? Who actually benefits from the narrative that AI is reaping environmental destruction? What are the human costs of anti-tech humanism? This video is the first part in a two-part series. In the first part, a review of the pushback to generative AI, especially from the left, and especially in the realm of art, labor, and environment. In the second part, the story of how the right wing rose to power in Silicon Valley and how AI plays a key role in their plans for creating a techno-feudalist state, and how that's a bad thing. I show that we can remain critical of big tech without foreclosing the possibility of technological futures beyond capitalism. But first, how did we get here? Part 1. How we got here. In the 21st century, AI is a shorthand, oftentimes even a marketing term, used to describe a diverse set of technologies that mimic human cognition. But there really isn't one good, comprehensive definition of artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence means a ton of different things because intelligence means a ton of different things. It might include stuff like decision-making, categorizing, and creating. The technology that we now call AI has actually been around for a while in things like navigation apps, facial recognition, and social media recommendation algorithms. In this day and age, tons of companies compete over access to this precious data. Your face, where you go, what you browse. They know about the Am I Gay quiz and the result. All right. Imagine your personal data is at a party. Your phone number's in the corner making small talk with scammers. Your email is grinding with targeted ads. And your search history? Yeah, it's oversharing. Yeah, he's really worried about which earring is on the gay side. The worst part? You weren't invited, but data brokers were. They're the ones throwing this rager, gathering all your personal data and selling it to marketing firms, people search sites, and scammers. And you're the one cleaning up the mess. Scam calls, spam emails, identity theft, and more. But you don't have to deal with the mess. That's why I use Incogni, the sponsor of this video. Incogni crashes the party for you. They contact these data brokers and legally demand they delete your info. I've been using Incogni the past few months and the difference has been huge. I've been applying to jobs recently, which means putting my email in a bunch of corporate websites with bad security. Since then, I have been getting scam calls and texts about fake jobs every single day. It was super concerning to know that my information was just out there somewhere. But after using Incogni, it's not even an issue anymore. But this isn't just about not getting annoyed by spam, it's about peace of mind. I don't have to worry about my email, my phone number, or even my social security number getting into the wrong hands. The best part? I don't have to do any work. No constant requests, no tracking down 50 shady websites. You can sit back and relax while Incogni contacts hundreds of data brokers on your behalf to delete your personal info. Incogni's site makes it super easy to track the status of removal requests, keeping you clued into the progress. And Incogni doesn't just track down and delete your data once, they continuously monitor where your data appears with repeated removals. Getting set up with Incogni is quick and easy. And guess what? You can save 60% off on an annual plan by using code AVILA at incogni.com/Avila. Protecting your data has never been easier. We return to those 20th century AI researchers tasked with building a talking machine. If we can understand how we got from early AI research to today's chatbots, we'll be able to adequately see what part of the tech is hype and what actually is innovative. So, if you want to build a machine that talks, first, you have to understand how talking works. Unfortunately for early AI researchers, language is one of the greatest mysteries of the human story. You poor bastards. Hey, but they tried. They even narrowed it down to a few different theories of language. At first, scientists were initially enamored with what we'll call the symbolic natural language processing paradigm. These squares argued that language corresponds to formal rules. If you could figure out these rules and get a computer to follow them, then baby, you got yourself a talking machine. Thanks, Noam Chomsky. Unfortunately, that did not work. I hate you, Noam Chomsky. And it also kind of destroyed the field of artificial intelligence for several decades. That is, until the late 80s and early 90s, when a new paradigm emerged called statistical natural language processing. These freaks proposed that the use of statistical techniques might get us to where we need to go. Okay, I see the vision, but they needed a few years to cook. Let me explain. Back in the 1950s, Zelig S. Harris articulated a theory of linguistic meaning now called distributionalism. This theory argues that the meaning of a word comes from the sum of the context in which it appears. For example, what do you think glorp means in the following sentences? I had to come out as a glorp to my parents today. I didn't realize he was a glorp until he mentioned something about a boyfriend. Oh, me and Tom? We're just friends. I'm not a glorp. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Tom, on the other hand, I don't know. There was a moment at a party when he grabbed my wrist and looked me in the eye as if something was on the tip of his tongue. I may be crazy, but God, I shouldn't be saying this, but I thought he was about to lean in. That's crazy, right? I don't know. Maybe he was drunk. I mean, he's never said anything about a partner, and I can tell his relationship with his father is a touchy subject. I hope he figures it out. So clearly, in this context, glorp means homosexual man. But we should also let Tom come out on his own timeline. This is all to say that this distributional hypothesis opened up a new world of possibilities for AI researchers. In theory, you could model linguistic meaning using a bunch of complicated math. If we take a moment to understand how it works, it might help us to understand today's AI hype a bit better. Imagine that we can illustrate linguistic meaning in a physical space where words are graphed along a set of axes, and where numerical coordinates on this graph correspond to some meaningful characteristic. Here's a famous example. Imagine a graph with age on one axis and gender on another. What words would you imagine occupy different sides of this graph? Words like man would be pretty far along here on the male side of the gender dimension, and in the middle of the age dimension. Boy and grandfather would also lie pretty far along the male side of the gender axis, but boy would lie on the younger side of the age dimension, and grandfather on the older side of the age dimension. We would expect similar relationships to be true for the coordinates on the female side of the graph. You get the idea, right? Words occupy different points on this graph, where words with similar meanings occupy points that are close together, and words with different meanings occupy points that are far apart. Since these spatial representations correspond to a set of numerical coordinates, it turns out that you can use math to model aspects of linguistic meaning in a computer by modeling the probability that words appear together in certain contexts. That's pretty f***ing cool. But how do you get from this concept to ChatGPT? Well, over the past several decades, there have been huge improvements in the field of computer science called deep learning. Think of deep learning as a process where you input a bunch of data into a model that uses neural networks to produce some kind of output. In the 2010s, thanks to innovations in hardware, the falling costs of microchips and GPUs, and worldwide digitalization allowing humans to accumulate immense amounts of data, deep learning models started to get a lot better at, well, deep learning. By the mid-2010s, technological breakthroughs in natural language processing and deep learning made it so that large language models, or LLMs, could produce entire paragraphs of coherent-sounding text by sophisticatedly reproducing the linguistic patterns it learned in its training data. These innovations made it possible for researchers to create pretty convincing LLMs, such as OpenAI's Generative Pre-trained Transformer, or GPT, in 2018. By training neural networks on huge datasets using new deep learning architectures, GPTs could finally generate content similar, or at least on first glance, to human output, which brings us to where we are today. Now, there's tons of things missing here, namely the fact that these models need to be supervised by exploited human labor to exist, or the fact that LLMs cannot consistently tell the truth. We'll get to that in a bit. But the point I want to emphasize is this. Critics often say that ChatGPT or other LLMs are nothing more than fancy word prediction machines or advanced autocomplete. I think it's a little misleading to call LLMs just fancy prediction machines similar to your phone's autocomplete. Your phone's autocomplete calculates the next likely word based on the single previous word you typed. But LLMs are different in that they capture, recognize, and maintain linguistic context throughout the conversation. I mean, what is context, right? While for ChatGPT, context might literally be a set of complicated equations, those equations map onto a world of meaning in pretty sophisticated ways. To capture meaning in a way that is advanced enough as to convey complex ideas to the person reading it is not to just capture a set of definitions, but to capture a set of historically determined dynamics and relationships. To capture and convey meaning is to capture and convey the sight of social conflicts, political tensions, latent biases. That's not to say that ChatGPT is a person with a subjectivity that understands, feels, or desires, but that this technology models complex, consequential semantic relationships in a way that might even help us understand our own collective unconscious. It's not hype to say that it's cool or interesting or useful.
The idea that it's just sort of predicting the next word and using statistics, there's a sense in which that's true, but it's not the sense of statistics that most people understand. From the data, it figures out how to extract the meaning of the sentence, and it uses the meaning of the sentence to predict the next word. It really does understand.
The use of the word understand might anthropomorphize the model more than we're comfortable with. Hyping these models up as sentient or human-like comes with real-life consequences. But to say that an LLM is just a fancy autocomplete is like saying that the internet is just a fancy library, or that an iPhone is just a fancy landline. Is your dog just a fancy stuffed animal? Is a human just a fancy pile of lunch meat with fancy electrical connections? The word fancy is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. You could describe anything in a diminishing way to make a point. Now, if your goal in doing so is to counter big tech's AI hype machine, then that's an admirable goal. But sophistry with an admirable goal is still sophistry. You should always and forever want to make Elon Musk cry, but I'm not going to kick his dog to do it. The fact that LLMs are able to recognize context is a huge and interesting development. Sorry if that makes me cringe and/or Reddit and/or soy to admit that science is cool. I guess I'm just a goddamn lunatic, huh? Take the example of how LLMs map the words man, woman, king, and queen. If you were to map these words onto an imaginary two-dimensional space based on how the LLM codes the meaning of these words, you'd find that the distance between king and queen is pretty similar to the distance between man and woman. That's pretty intuitive, right? And it's interesting how a bunch of math is able to capture these relationships. But the LLMs also capture problematic patterns. The distance between man and woman is similar to the distance between computer programmer and homemaker. Somehow, from a bunch of numerical data, the language model is able to recognize patterns of social relationships, specifically gendered relationships, dynamics, binaries. It's able to distill the complexities of gendered life into some kind of representation. sure, an imperfect representation, but gender itself is an imperfect representation. Gender dictates our lives, our relationships, our understandings of ourselves, history, and politics. Like the fact that you can put data into an algorithm that somehow ends up capturing, in its own way, the social field, that's fucking crazy. The fact that LLMs model gender in this way is not simply an example of data bias. This is an example of data's ability to recognize the concepts that structure our understanding of the universe and our psyche. And through this recognition, maybe, just maybe, LLMs, if used in the right way, could help us challenge these existing structures. Who knows what other strange and unanticipated worlds lie in its matrices? Who knows how we could use it to discover new things about ourselves and the representational regimes that surround us? Post-Marxist theorists Laclau and Mouffe argue that the definitions, locations, and functions of words like democracy or the people within discourse are important sites of hegemonic struggle.
And respect the importance of our democracy.
She's a threat to democracy.
And is undermining American democracy.
What meaning does democracy actually have?
The form in which liberty, equality, democracy, and justice are defined at the level of political philosophy may have important consequences at a variety of other levels of discourse and contribute decisively to shaping the common sense of the masses. Meaning is always contingent, always in flux, always available for rearticulation. If the structure of an LLM can reveal underlying power relations embedded in language, can it not also serve as a site for their disruption? Rather than merely reproducing dominant ideological formations, which itself could be useful for social research, could the strange interpolations and slippages of machine learning open up new possibilities for counter-hegemonic articulation? Is the logic of equivocation found in mathematically represented meaning not the logic of exchange value itself? The logic of capital, the logic of deterritorialization, the logic that dictates our very subjectivity? Help! Unfortunately for everyone, those who control the technology are tiny, evil, fascist boys. Part 2. Hype. The things we call artificial intelligence today were, in the 2010s, an invisible force underlying our experience of technology in ways we didn't even realize. Navigation, translation, Siri. But people didn't even want to call these things AI because in the 2010s, the term AI didn't really have cultural power. Up until the 2020s, the things that we call AI today were, in the 2010s and prior, called deep learning, or machine learning, or neural networks. But these days, calling something AI gives it some mysterious and exceptional power. Add the label AI to your startup and venture capitalists will throw around millions. How did this happen? Well, you know those innovations in LLMs we talked about earlier? One company figured out how to sell them. In 2015, a group of Silicon Valley investors founded a nonprofit organization called OpenAI. According to OpenAI's introductory article, the company's goal was to advance digital intelligence in the way that is most likely to benefit humanity as a whole, unconstrained by a need to generate financial return. As Vanity Fair reported in one of the first OpenAI profiles, CEO Sam Altman wanted to keep AI out of the hands of the bad guys. If that sounds vague and slightly menacing, then you're not alone. For the first few years of OpenAI's history, their employees didn't know what they were doing either. But around 2017, OpenAI began directing all their power toward developing artificial general intelligence, or AGI. AGI is a hypothetical version of an AI model that would be able to do any cognitive task as well or better than a human can. Contrast this with narrow AI, which is trained to do specific tasks like, say, drive cars that explode and kill people. The fact that OpenAI explicitly aimed at creating AGI, the fact that it was a nonprofit, and the fact that its initial investors were quite prominent figures caught the attention of Silicon Valley. Since 2015, OpenAI has not only grown to be a household name, but they are responsible for shoving AI technology to the front of our collective consciousness. With the debut of their fancy public-facing LLM chatbot, ChatGPT, in 2022, the company set off a public frenzy. ChatGPT's ability to maintain coherent-sounding conversations caught the world's attention. You can see how the spike in popularity of the term AI coincides exactly with ChatGPT's launch in November of 2022. But the OpenAI of 2025 is pretty different from the OpenAI of 2015. mirroring a lot of larger problems with the AI industry. Several initial aspects of the OpenAI mission have shifted over the years, drawing skepticism over whether OpenAI's current domination over the AI market is good. So this might be surprising, but there's actually no money in trying to benefit humanity as a whole. In light of this startling discovery, in 2019, OpenAI started a for-profit subsidiary of the company in an effort to raise more money. So that's one shift. Here's another. In the Vanity Fair article from 2015, Altman claimed that OpenAI would remain transparent about its research, yet the company has been repeatedly criticized for its lack of transparency, including in an open letter signed by its own employees. OpenAI claimed that it would distribute AI evenly to all of humanity. But as of now, OpenAI's most advanced models are locked behind a $200 a month subscription. So that's not super distributed, is it? In 2015, Altman pitched OpenAI as a nonprofit led by a small team of dedicated researchers with nothing to hide and nothing to profit from. I don't think we want a 1,000-person organization ever. But now, OpenAI is one of the largest AI companies, 5,000 employees strong, with little to no meaningful oversight and billions in government contracts. And as it happens, the company is now itching to shift its needlessly complicated corporate structure into a for-profit. I'm sure this is fine. The evolution of OpenAI from nonprofit with good intentions to tech giant touting secretive defense contracts is emblematic of America's tech industry these days, maybe even all industries. When it comes to the economy, there's no reward for being a good guy and infinite advantage in being a bad one. Sometimes doing good things is profitable, but that's mostly just a happy accident. Why? Because capitalism has a particular incentive structure oriented toward consumption, the accumulation of capital, the domination of markets. In a word, growth. To grow in the tech business, it's not enough to just do a thing some people find useful. It's not even enough to make a boatload of short-term profits, though that helps. To succeed in tech, you have to convince people that you're building the infrastructure of the future. Now, maybe you are. Maybe you aren't. It doesn't matter. People just need to believe that you are. And to get people to believe, you need a little thing called hype. In the tech industry, hype involves the process of promising, usually over-promising, what a technology person, company, or other entity is capable of doing, all in the name of increasing consumer interest and therefore investment. After the release of ChatGPT in 2022, interest and investment in generative AI exploded, initiating an arms race between the existing tech giants. Now we don't just have ChatGPT, but we also have Gemini, Llama, Grok, Claude, John, Paul, George, Ringo. Generative AI is everywhere. But there's a problem. We've learned how to build chatbots that output plausible sounding sentences, but we haven't quite figured out how to get them to consistently tell the truth. I mean, the president can't do either of those things, so we must be onto something with those bots, huh? Well, not exactly. While generative AI is an interesting and, hey, maybe even useful tool when applied well, the tech industry likes to pretend that large language models are capable of more than they're actually capable of. It's going to take your job. It's going to revolutionize work. It's gonna do science for us. It's gonna do art for us. It's gonna do everything that makes life meaningful for us so that we can, do other stuff, I guess. But instead of engaging with the philosophical, political, and sociological complexities and consequences of even formulating these questions, tech companies have decided to shove these models in the public's face as soon as possible. Basically, implement AI now and deal with the problems later. I'm sure you've encountered this. AI in our drive-thrus.
You added bacon to my ice cream. I don't want bacon.
What else can I get for you?
In our Google results, in the botted replies to our posts.
AI sauce?
With the rise of AI-generated images, our feeds are flooded with just more shit. The shit of capital. Libidinal excrement. That which they call slop. And it's not even like this content is unpopular. Why do these repulsive AI cat videos have 90 million views? What is this doing to our minds? No, Grandma, that Jesus video is AI-generated and facilitating an oligarchical fascist takeover. Please stop showing this to me. The world is now burdened with an excess of new AI startups that really only offer repurposed ChatGPT wrappers that pretend to do things they cannot, all in the effort to seduce the interest of venture capital. Now, while we should definitely point and laugh at the failures of our aristocrats, when AI ventures fail, rich investors aren't the only ones who suffer. People's lives are at stake. In case you haven't noticed, the current social system has a lot of problems. For example, access to quality physical and mental health services in the United States is horrendous. Americans pay more for healthcare than all industrialized countries, yet experience worse health outcomes than similarly wealthy nations. One might look at the American healthcare system and say, yeah, maybe a for-profit healthcare system has some fundamental problems that need, at the very least, massive reform to adequately address. But if you're a tech entrepreneur whose brain is filled with cotton candy, you instead respond to the massive failure of our underfunded social system with, AI will save us. Yeah, I know it doesn't make sense, but why make sense when you can make money?
Meet Renee. She's a doctor who specializes in the diagnosis and treatment of cancer. Except, Renee doesn't exist. Renee is an AI healthcare agent created by the company Hippocratic AI. Hippocratic AI's mission aims to address the worldwide shortage of healthcare workers by replacing them with AI chatbots. Wait, but why is there a shortage of healthcare workers? Why does healthcare cost so much? Who cares? They raised over $100 million, so they must know what they're doing.
Would you trust an AI nurse with your life? Yeah. Neither would Greg Corrado, a senior research director at Google working on a similar medical AI chatbot, who said, I don't feel that this kind of technology is yet at a place where I would want it in my family's healthcare journey. So, what would you do if an AI chatbot killed you? Probably nothing, I guess, since you'd be dead. Okay, what would you do if an AI chatbot killed someone you loved? What if an AI chatbot killed Timothée Chalamet? Who would you sue? The robot? The company? We aren't really sure, and that's by design. AI companies want to keep this all as ambiguous as possible so that they can't be held accountable when their stuff doesn't work. It's not just healthcare. AI enthusiasts and entrepreneurs are pushing to incorporate AI in the realm of governance, policing, social services, and more. AI can revolutionize who we decide to send to jail. How? By continuing to be racist. AI can help us decide who should receive healthcare. How? By getting better at denying people's insurance claims. AI can help lawyers lie. Not that they needed it. Wow, I'm so excited for the future. Though many of these AI technologies aren't new or specifically generative AI, the recent AI boom has given tech enthusiasts across the nation the legitimacy that they need to implement these technologies wherever possible. Now, humans aren't perfect. Humans kill people too. I'll never talk about what happened on the night of March 23rd, 2011, that's for sure. Humans are biased. Human doctors can also be bad doctors. Did you know that 60% of medical students believe racist myths like that black people have thicker skin than white people? Did you know that physicians are more likely to gaslight and misdiagnose women and racial minorities than white men? Did you know that women and minorities are less likely to receive pain medication than men or whites undergoing the same medical procedures? In fact, some research indicates that ChatGPT actually outperforms doctors in giving accurate medical diagnoses. But let's pause here before we commit to hating or hyping AI. The problem with systemic issues like quality healthcare access or racist policing isn't just shitty humans. Systemic racism, structural violence, social hierarchy, inequitable access to public goods, these are all problems that would persist whether or not shitty people were in positions of power. Bad outcomes are not the result of individuals doing bad things in otherwise fine systems. Bad outcomes are the result of bad systems that incentivize and orient institutions, actors, and norms in a particular direction. Systemic problems require restructuring social systems. Placing AI in charge of a shitty system would not only not fix the systemic problem, but potentially exacerbate the existing harm that these systems do. Healthcare, policing, and underfunded social services are not something AI can single-handedly do or solve. But AI isn't exactly the villain of this story. The problem is not just that healthcare companies are using AI to deny insurance claims, but the fact that we live in a for-profit system that ultimately gives a small group of people the right to determine who should live or die. AI technology has legitimate use cases that benefit the public welfare. Of the many entities that take on the AI label, there are tons that actually do things. AlphaFold's protein structure prediction model has arguably pushed forward medical advancements by several years.
When I was told about the application of AI to drug development, I sort of rolled my eyes and said, yeah, show me the data.
And then I looked at the data, and it was very compelling.
And natural language processing, machine translation, has improved massively in the past decade, connecting speakers of different languages across the globe. Google's GenCast helps officials predict extreme weather events and generate advanced forecasts, potentially saving lives in the process at a fraction of the cost. This doesn't mean replacing important work in the name of meaningless mechanical efficiency, but giving people new tools to help people in unanticipated ways. But yeah, AI-enabled misinformation isn't cool. Putting chatbots in charge of high-stakes situations, I'd pass on that one. The lack of oversight at a lot of these AI startups, the clear profit incentives, over-promising and misrepresenting what the tech can and should do. Not cool. We can use predictive and generative AI in ways that benefit public health, knowledge, and flourishing. Unfortunately, our current economic system doesn't really reward doing good things for public welfare. When Google initially took a cautious approach toward AI development and held off on releasing a chatbot that didn't meet their standards of safety and fairness, they didn't get any reward. They were punished. Their competitors took advantage of the opening. The current incentive structure does not work in the public welfare's favor. So, in whose favor does it work then? The AI ownership class does not comprise one set of individuals with a specific ideology or vision for the world, but they all share one key intention: to build and control the infrastructure of the future and make money. There tends to be two flavors of hype coming from today's AI gurus: boosters and doomers.
AI boosters see AI as a potentially revolutionary force for good that, once sentient and intelligent enough, can usher in an age of economic prosperity, scientific advancement, and unlimited creativity.
AI will cause great abundance, great GDP growth, great productivity growth.
Weird how this bold vision for a revolutionary future is still measured in GDP. AI doomers, on the other hand, see AI as a powerful existential risk that might take over the world and enslave humanity.
I think AI is one of the biggest threats.
Though it seems that boosters and doomers are diametrically opposed, in reality, those who hype the technology and those who exalt its existential risk occupy two sides of the same coin. They're both hyping the technology. This narrative places AI right at the center of the battle for the future of humanity. But, of course, this also places tech CEOs who control AI at the center of building and controlling that future.
And you know, I can't predict the future. For all we know, the world could blow up tomorrow. The man in my walls could finally make himself known, and maybe today's finally the day they unearth Abraham Lincoln's secret gay letters. Completely denying the possibility that technology can facilitate an equitable future is as misguided as ignoring the real, current human harms that technology makes invisible. But not everyone believes or wants a future with AI. And I'm not talking about the doomers who think AI is going to enslave humanity. I'm talking about the AI critics and skeptics from all walks of life concerned about the impact that AI implementation will have and is having on real people. Following the AI boom of the 2020s, a wave of backlash emerged to contest what many people see as the actual real-world consequences of AI hype and implementation. What could AI mean for artists, the environment, labor, politics, and the value of human life itself? And what if this whole boom isn't actually a boom and more of a bubble? Are we going to ignore all these human costs for an overhyped bubble? According to tech writer Cory Doctorow, tech bubbles come in two varieties: the ones that leave something behind and the ones that leave nothing behind. Speculative frenzies aren't anything new. They go all the way back to the 17th century with tulip mania, and it hasn't stopped. Bicycle mania, railway mania, the dot-com bubble, but we still use bikes, trains, and the internet. I don't know what I'm gonna do with this warehouse full of tulips, though. Sure, maybe AI is overhyped, but when the hype is gone, what'll be left? What if there's more than meets the eye here? In the wake of a technology that many see as devaluing our humanity, is the answer to return to the humanisms of yore? Or perhaps AI has opened a third way? One that forces us to articulate a new set of commitments. In the face of a future that is being stolen before our very eyes, do we really want to go back to the way things were before?
Part 3. Backlash.
There's plenty of good reasons to dislike what's happening with AI. But there's also plenty of bad reasons. Why are the bad reasons bad? Well, for one, a lot of these reasons are philosophically unsound or contradict principles that we probably shouldn't contradict. If you and I both hate Jeff Bezos, then great, that's awesome. But if you tell me that you hate him because he's bald, then whoa, buddy, the bald community has suffered enough. So just because we agree on some points doesn't mean that we agree on important fundamental points. Hating Bezos for his baldness doesn't actually hurt Bezos as much as it reinforces the material subjection of our non-billionaire alopecic friends. Similarly, when it comes to AI, the specific way that people have learned to criticize AI has unintended material consequences. Consequences that affect human lives. Consequences that backfire or throw us into the worst timeline. So, let's go over most of the reasons why people dislike the current state of the AI industry, and why I think these criticisms are often incomplete. First, let's outline the key recurring points that I hear from AI skeptics. 1. AI doesn't do what the hype says it does. 2. AI is based on theft and plagiarism. 3. AI will negatively impact labor. 4. AI harms the environment. 5. AI is facilitating big tech's fascist bid for world domination. Now, I agree with some of these statements, and am totally sympathetic to the intentions behind all of them. Yeah, the techno-fascists are scary. Yeah, the AI hype leads to AI being used in ways that hurt people. So true. But in this chapter, let's focus on the first 4 and get to the last point in the second part of this series. There's an underlying philosophical idea that motivates the first 4 critiques, one that I've spent the past few years criticizing on this channel. Underlying the AI skeptic worldview is a humanist philosophy. As humanists, these critics believe that humans are inherently valuable and that AI harms and devalues humanity. Now, humanism sounds good on paper, especially if you're human. I mean, hell yeah, I'm valuable. Sorry to any eukaryotic cells watching, but I, in some ways, agree. Humanity is pretty cool. But humanism as a first principles philosophy is tricky. In the past few decades, a huge part of the work done by critical academics in feminism, critical race theory, and post-colonial studies has been in critiquing the category of human as a historically constructed Western concept. Now, there isn't anything inherently wrong with being Western or being constructed. The Eiffel Tower hasn't hurt anybody. But these critiques of bourgeois liberal humanism do important work in showing how the category of human, or man, emerged in Western thought at a specific point in time to justify some really grotesque worldviews. This isn't just an abstract philosophical contention or a little argument in an ivory tower, but a truly world historical struggle. Liberal individualism, human rights, subjectivity, the Cartesian thinking subject, the figure of the human underlies all of these important concepts as a fundamental fixture of Western thought. The struggles for feminism, anti-racism, anti-colonialism are often articulated in the form of contesting status quo definitions of what it means to be human. After all, who gets to decide who is human and what that means? How do we define what it means to be human and what rights fall under the moniker of human rights? Again, this might sound like an abstract debate, but I bring it up because while emancipatory humanism sounds great in theory, it has real material consequences. While it does ideologically justify good things like democracy, it also serves as an exclusionary project, one that has justified systems like slavery, patriarchy, and colonialism by declaring minorities, women, and subaltern peoples as unhuman. Emancipatory humanism can so easily become reactionary humanism. I said that we're here to talk about consequences. So, what are the real-world consequences of uncritically relying on old philosophical frameworks? Let's go through the AI critics' concerns by rigorously unpacking the question of meaning, its implications for art, the environment, labor, and politics. It might get a little freaky, it might get a little abstract, but it's also a topic that warrants this level of depth. Let's start this conversation by discussing point 1.
AI doesn't do what the hype says it does.
We've gone over how language models work. They create text that looks plausible based on its ability to capture patterns of linguistic meaning. Some might be offended by the following question, but bear with me. Is what LLMs do much different than what humans do when they process meaning? In response, I'll say this. We don't know how human cognition works. That doesn't mean human subjectivity or experience isn't unique, but intelligence or consciousness isn't a thing you can observe or definitively draw a box around. Intelligence and consciousness are limited and incomplete human constructs because we truly don't know what's going on up here. Questions like, is AI intelligent, or is AI conscious, or can AI ever be conscious, are all, in my opinion, worthless questions that risk treading into racist histories. Like tons of stuff in contemporary culture, these constructs have horrific eugenicist and exclusionary histories. We can't just throw these terms around uncritically in the way that AI boosters might. The entire history of the concept of intelligence itself is a history of the ways things like IQ have been used to exclude non-Western culture and people.
In the 1920s, eugenicists like Carl Brigham used IQ test results to push the superiority of the Nordic race group. The concepts that have been historically tested for in IQ exams aren't universal measures of intelligence, but culturally specific tests that purposefully try to make non-Western and non-white people seem less intelligent. You can directly link Stanford University's early eugenicist roots to the ideologies that underlie Silicon Valley today.
And as for consciousness, we don't know exactly what that means. Think about it. What does it mean to know or to have knowledge in the first place? Modern science requires a subject and an object. But when subjectivity itself is the object, then it's really hard, maybe even impossible, to properly observe it as a scientific object. Consciousness and subjectivity belong to the realm of philosophy, or phenomenology if you're freaky. So I'm not going to empirically declare anything about subjectivity, consciousness, and whether LLMs or AI possess any of that. It's like asking a meteorologist what emotion the sky tastes like. It's just not a question that we can pretend to have an empirical answer to. My concern here isn't with the question of consciousness, however. My concern is with the certainty with which some AI skeptics approach the question of technology's relationship to meaning. What do I mean? Well, as we've established, the AI industry relies on hype. The tech industry benefits from making LLMs seem human-like or intelligent. So if you're an AI critic who wants to see it all come crashing down, you have one really powerful line of attack. Argue that LLMs aren't human-like or intelligent at all. If you can peel back the curtain of hype and show how AI isn't as capable as tech bros claim it is, then the entire tech empire crumbles. I absolutely agree with the goal here. When it comes to AI, we're talking about the richest men on the planet racing to control the future. Men with hundreds of billions of dollars who fantasize about saving humanity, democracy be damned. But we have to be careful about how we do this. Like, if the empire finally crumbles, what's left in its wake? Will we simply rebuild old capitalist bureaucracies and systems of control? I think that big tech is a destructive and horrific force for the world, but it is because of that fact, not in spite of it, that I think our critique of AI, the principles behind it, and our vision for what comes next needs to be as strong as possible. One of the leading critics of the AI hype machine are Dr. Emily Bender and Dr. Alex Hanna.
My name is Emily M. Bender. I'm a professor of linguistics at the University of Washington. My area of work is broadly computational linguistics. I have a lot to say about what linguistics can say about large language models, how they're built, how we perceive them, and the hype around them.
My name is Alex Hanna. I'm Director of Research at the Distributed AI Research Institute, which is a nonprofit research institute that focuses on the harms of AI and other computational technologies.
When it comes to AI, they know what they're talking about. In fact, they wrote a much anticipated book which comes out this May, The AI Con, where they lay down a compelling case against big tech's hype. I had the chance to read the book and speak with them on the topic.
What's at stake with how we talk about AI today?
Short version is power is at stake with how we talk about AI. And the misleading ways that we talk about it or that people talk about it allow for the accumulation and various misuses of power.
Dr. Bender is right. Hype lets the tech oligarchs accumulate more money and more power, which is why it's crucial that we provide compelling counter-narratives. When it comes to large language models, Bender and Hanna are famous for doing just that.
In 2020, Dr. Bender co-authored an article with Alexander Kohler called Climbing Towards NLU. The authors argue that, contrary to the belief of tech enthusiasts, large language models cannot comprehend language or engage with meaning. They argue that meaning is the relation between a linguistic form and communicative intent, and state that a model of natural language that is trained purely on form will not learn meaning. Essentially, large language models cannot understand because understanding is rooted in what they call communicative intent. And communicative intent requires the experience of face-to-face communication to truly understand the context of meaning. According to Bender and Kohler, language is rooted in human experience and relationships, something that large language models do not and probably will never grasp. To describe the way that LLMs stitch together words and sentences based on statistical probability, Emily Bender derisively calls LLMs stochastic parrots. Now, some tech people in response argue that humans are also nothing more than advanced probability machines. Sam Altman semi-sarcastically tweeted, "I am a stochastic parrot and so are you." Cute. But critics like Bender and Hanna maintain that there's something unique and valuable about humans, and that anthropomorphizing LLMs when they are nothing more than, in their words, souped-up autocomplete is a dangerous anti-human game.
Except, hold on a second. Is it? Okay, so let me tell you what I'm not about to do. I am not about to argue that LLMs are sentient or conscious. I'm not about to say that humans are also just stochastic parrots. What I'm about to do is problematize the basis on which we can definitively make claims about the meaningfulness of LLMs and describe the real consequences of doing so. First, we have to understand a bit about 20th century linguistics. You're on the edge of your seat, aren't you?
In the early 1900s, Ferdinand de Saussure made a radical claim about the nature of meaning, one that would influence critical philosophical discourses for decades. In his course of general linguistics, he argued that linguistic signs, what we might call a word, only acquire meaning through the ways they differ from other signs. Signifiers contain no inherent or positive value. Their linguistic value comes from their relationships to other signs. As an example, think of a dictionary. It's a word book full of words to describe other words. The only way to access the meaning of any given word is through other goddamn words. This isn't to say that there isn't a reality that these words attempt to describe, but Saussure's legacy shows us the ways that we are always embedded in interpretation. To understand reality is to understand reality through a complex system of signs in relation to other signs. Saussure wasn't just a crackpot French guy. His theory provided the foundation for tons of innovations in linguistics, sociology, anthropology, philosophy, and literary theory. If you're a postmodern degenerate like me who believes in anything written by Foucault, Lacan, or Derrida, then you absolutely have Saussure to blame for this. If you are a progressive or left-leaning person, then you're probably influenced by the important work in critical race theory, feminist philosophy, post-structuralism, and cultural studies, inspired by Saussure's disciples. Saussure's theories even influenced the very distributional hypothesis of language that led to the current innovations in LLMs. But besides Saussure's broad influence, what's the point in bringing up all this stuff? This is Dr. David Gunkel. He, like Bender and Hanna, agrees that the conversation on AI is about power.
It means that making a claim to what is really real is about power.
In an article he wrote with Mark Kokelberg, they describe some interesting conflicts between critics of AI and linguistic theory. I mean, if you're gonna critique LLM's ability to convey or understand meaning, and if you're butting heads with foundational work in linguistic theory, then well, you should stop and take a breather, right? And here's why. Gunkel and Kokelberg show how AI skeptics often reinstate and reify certain assumptions in Western philosophy that we should perhaps do away with.
So the idea behind the stochastic parrots essay and a lot of the critical essays written on large language models is that they use language, but they don't have access to the referent.
As Bender and Kohler write, communicative intents are about something that is outside of language, but LLMs don't have access to the outside of language.
They don't have a body, they don't have senses, and they don't live in the world. And therefore, they're not using language in the right way.
Defining meaning is notoriously hard. For the purposes of this paper, we chose a working definition which is as general as we could make it, capturing the crucial point that meaning is based on the link between linguistic form and something that is not language.
Post-structuralism flips the script on this, and it says, wait a minute, is that really how language works? And the big figure here is the structural theorist Ferdinand de Saussure. So Saussure's big insight is that language really refers to language. and that it is a system of differences, that the way that we understand one word is its difference from another word.
So we're kind of at an impasse. On the one hand, AI critics like Emily Bender argue that LLMs do not produce meaningful statements because meaning is rooted in something outside of language, in our shared human understanding. But on the other hand, as David Gunkel says here, Bender's work is rooted in just one particular philosophical tradition. As Kokelberg and Gunkel state, this suspicion toward language that has no speaker or a referent is as old as the West itself. In Phaedrus, Plato levied this very critique at a hot new ancient technology called the written word. Writing Phaedrus has this strange quality. You might think it spoke as if it had intelligence, but if you question it, wishing to know about its saying, it always says only one and the same thing. But who cares what Plato said about writing, right? Well, Western civilization, apparently. Plato's quote hints at a core concept that French philosopher Jacques Derrida called logocentrism. But this isn't just a niche philosophical debate. Logocentrism isn't just another ism, but the ism. Kokelberg and Gunkel call it the ruling conceptual apparatus of Western philosophy and science. And it's alive and well in the ways that critics of AI formulate their argument. As I said, we're getting a little abstract and freaky here, but bear with me.
If I may, just briefly, unpack all of Western metaphysics. So, Western thought is based on the distinction between reality and appearance. The West has this idea that there's a difference between things and representations of things. In this view, representations like symbols or signs are simply the means by which we arrive at truth. These symbols or signs have no truth in themselves. In this search for truth, Western thought privileges presence over absence, the speaker over the written word. When we apply this logic to language overall, the argument goes something like this. Humans have thoughts and use words to express those thoughts. Speech is the most immediate manifestation of thought. Therefore, words acquire their meaning from the minds and intentions of speakers. In the book of Grammatology, Derrida critiques this whole thing. There's two key moves: the deconstruction of logocentrism and the deconstruction of binary oppositions. For Derrida, words, or rather signs, don't acquire meaning from any fixed source. Like Saussure, he believes that signs acquire meaning through the ways they differ from other signs. For example, try to define the word apple right now without using other words. Try it. Go ahead. So, maybe you're slick, and you always carry an apple around on the off chance that you need to debate metaphysics. And maybe when I said define apple, you so slyly pointed to the apple in your hand so as to refer to something present in the world. Okay, you slick little metaphysician. Well, what about this apple, huh? This isn't the object that you pointed to, and yet we probably agree that it's an apple. Or what about this? Is this an apple? Why? Why not? What is it that gives these things their appleness? Who decides the coherence of concepts that become apple? Is it shape, color, texture, taste? But are those not mere conceptual representations of experiences? And are experiences not mental representations of things, or in other words, symbolic? Symbols, signs, words? And what if I eat the apple and the acid in my stomach turns it into goo? Is that an apple? What about when the materials of the apple are redistributed into my body in the form of nutrients? Am I apple? We can go in circles forever, which is quite literally the point. The search for any fundamental meanings and origins is fraught from the start. This is because, as Derrida argues, meaning is always deferred. It is never fully present or anchored in some absolute essence. There is no fundamental foundation on which to base any truth, origin, meaning, or value. There is no truth that exists behind the sign. To believe otherwise is to fall into what Derrida calls the metaphysics of presence, the assumption that meaning is directly accessible and stable, that words transparently refer to things in themselves. This isn't to deny that reality exists, but to state that reality is something that is iteratively produced. Sure, this is an apple, but only because it maps onto a complex system of constantly changing symbols. How we understand the sign apple changes based on context. The sign apple does not acquire meaning through some fundamental origin, but through the way it differs from other signs in a particular context. The meaning of apple will vary vastly, depending on if we're talking about an apple as a cultural representation, a historical literary figure, a biological object, a commodity, or a culinary product. Reality is not one root from which the branches of knowledge grow. Reality is a process. It's an interpretive and performative gesture. Again, who cares? Well, again, all of Western thought. Let me put this into terms that might feel more real. Derrida doesn't just critique logocentrism for the sake of it. As we've established, this isn't just about language, it's about power. The logic that says that speech is pure while writing is corrupt is the same logic that says that man is rational while woman is hysterical, that white is universal while black is other. Western thought doesn't describe these hierarchies, it creates them. Derrida's critique isn't just about words. It's about how reality itself has been structured to enforce these distinctions. With that in mind, I brought the question of meaning directly to Dr. Bender.
I think sometimes people read my work and my work with Alexander Kohler in the Climbing Towards NLU paper as saying that meaning is reference to an external world and that we're assuming sort of an objective reality that can be referred to, or that meaning is in concepts. And it's true that it's not in the text anywhere, but what I'm coming to is that meaning is in relationships, but not relationships between words. Meaning is in relationships between people. And meaning is constantly negotiated in conversation. In order to have access to that, in order to participate in that, you have to be the kind of entity that can be in relationship. And so I think the point still holds that LLMs don't do that at all. LLMs see and manipulate the form of what we're doing when we're doing linguistic activity, but have no access to what's going on the meaning side of things, which I think is probably best thought of as relational between people.
But this is where Dr. Bender and I disagree. Relationships between words are relationships between people. Although LLMs do not make meaningful statements as people, I think they challenge our conception of meaning in meaningful ways. Technology, like all things in this world, is not a dead surface, but a performative point of entanglement. If we relegate meaning and truth to the realm of presence or humanity or the mind or the cogito or whatever, then we lose the critical power that is fundamental to so much of the fantastic work of scholars like Foucault, Winter, Fanon, Butler, and more. Anyone committed to the project of social justice has to be committed to a project that historicizes and destabilizes the status quo. There is no separating the concept of something like human from its history. It's embedded in the way the political and social order uses that concept. The job of any emancipatory project should be to show how the categories we take for granted, our knowledge, our selfhood, our truths, are all subject to historical and social change. When we work from a framework like Derrida's, which shows that meaning has no fundamental origin point, it gives us a lot of power to challenge and destabilize unjust definitions and ideas. And I don't think Dr. Bender and Dr. Hanna necessarily disagree with what I'm saying.
By arguing that the category of human is unique and inherently valuable, and that LLMs are not a part of that category, that they're not intelligent, do we risk reifying or relying on the same categories of human that have been deconstructed by post-colonial, feminist, anti-racist, and other critical scholars?
You're spot on that the kind of category of human, I think, is rightly criticized by people in those traditions, especially in thinking about what it means to be human in a way that Black people in particular had been excluded from that. There's some intellectual work to be done in sort of thinking about, well, where's the rapprochement here between the notion of what it means to be human and the devaluing of certain populations in fitting in the category of human, and then the wholesale devaluing of human by a technological apparatus or that is embodied by, Sam Altman. and I think there's something very valuable to be fleshed out there, which I think could build on the argument in the book, but I don't think we make it explicit.
It's not that AI critics are wrong to criticize big tech. The problem is that when we do, we have to consider how our critiques carry historical and cultural baggage. This doesn't mean that we can't construct pro-social, anti-big tech frameworks in the name of some form of humanism, but we can't do so without fundamentally challenging the categories we use, the oppressive assumptions we rely on, and what type of world might emerge as a result.
I think the means by which we develop the critique can't reactualize the very colonial way of thinking that we're trying to critique.
At the very least, we have to acknowledge that the question of the human isn't settled, so we can't uncritically commit to fighting in its name. The question of linguistic meaning isn't settled, so we can't commit to a philosophy that prevents us from the ability to question dominant ideas and definitions. In critiquing big tech, which realities and subjectivities do we make impossible?
Take Judith Butler. Their theory of gender performativity was a crucial contribution to feminist philosophy, and today provides trans activism with a theoretical lens absolutely crucial for gender liberation. In their work, Gender Trouble, they famously argue that gender and sex are social constructs without stable origins. They write that our gendered categories emerge from the repetition of social roles. Gender is not innate, but performative. It is not something you are, it is something you do.
It's a powerful lens. It destabilizes patriarchal power by unhinging it from any transcendent origin, and it argues for a freer relationship to identity. I wonder where Judith Butler got the idea of social concepts without fundamental origins. I wonder what famous 20th century French philosopher Butler directly cites when they challenge the idea that meaning has any singular authoritative root. As Butler writes in Gender Trouble,
I originally took my clue on how to read the performativity of gender from Jacques Derrida's reading of Kafka's Before the Law. There, the one who waits for the law, sits before the door of the law, attributes a certain force to the law for which one waits. The anticipation of an authoritative disclosure of meaning is the means by which that authority is attributed and installed. The anticipation conjures its object.
Butler, like Derrida, deconstructs binary oppositions like sex and gender. Consider the traditional story we tell ourselves about gender.
That the hard reality of binary biological sex justifies its cultural appearance as gender. But history shows that biological sex is also just as socially constructed, just as interpreted, just as cultural, and just as flexible to change as gender or identity. Sex is not a set of two perfect binary categories, but a spectrum of different characteristics like hormones, hips, hair, genitals, chromosomes, parts, a plurality of objects onto which we project cultural ideas. Trans people know this very well.
I have XX chromosomes, yet I grow facial hair, have typically male testosterone levels, a low voice, and a Latina's ass. I am a testament to biological sex flexibility. There is no reality behind my appearance. That's not to say that categories like gender aren't real, but that the search for some fundamental origin point often leads to restrictive and oppressive categorical regimes. Alright, so we understand why it's important to question dominant categories, binaries, and the whole appearance-reality distinction. What a great framework, Dr. Butler. Now, what do we think about AI? Surely Judith Butler, post-structuralist god, Derridean disciple, master of the performative, has something subversive to say about AI, right? Let's see what they wrote.
There's a narcissism that reemerges in the AI dream that we are going to prove that everything we thought was distinctively human can actually be accomplished by machines and accomplished better. Or that human potential, that's the fascist idea, human potential is more fully actualized with AI than without it. Some people say, yes, isn't that great? Or isn't that interesting? Let's get over our romantic ideas, our anthropocentric idealism, debunking. But the question of what's living in my speech, what's living in my emotion, in my love, in my language, gets eclipsed.
And I'm firmly against fascist ideas of the human, obviously. And sure, that's a nice romantic way to view language if we're talking off the cuff, but, Dr. Butler, what happened to logocentrism? Performativity? The entire philosophical framework you staked your entire career on? The debunking is kind of important to the project of liberation you've spent the last 40 years defending. I'm not going to sit here and say I know more than Judith Butler. I definitely do not. And I know why Butler makes this point. The threat of fascism and corporate control is imminent. But that threat emerged out of the very same Western humanist culture that Butler spent their whole lives criticizing. And this isn't the time to forget that. When we return to the question of how do we fight this or what comes next, is our answer going to be to return to the things we spent the whole 20th century wrestling with? As I'm going to say again and again, this isn't just philosophy. This isn't intellectual wankery. Relying on humanist, logocentric, authorial frameworks of meaning has real, concrete consequences. It's something that can so very easily backfire if we continue to perpetuate it uncritically. And in no place is this exemplified more than in the fight over art. We now arrive at point 2 of the AI skeptic's worldview. AI is based on theft and plagiarism.
I do think there is valid reason and necessity to be rude to people who believe AI is art, or playing devil's advocate towards its supporters. Frankly, I want to be incredibly cruel to these people, to say the least. I think those people spit on thousands upon thousands of years of genuine human expression. It's a profound abomination to the sanctity of life. Until you idiots can protect actual artists from having their data scraped by robots, I fully support people being rude and hostile to you. Psychological need? Redact AI artists with a rock. I'll say this as many times as I can. We need to redact AI artists with hammers. I think God should redact AI artists. Redact AI artists, slice them in half and feast on their organs. It's not enough for these people to be shat on. I need them to be actively torn to pieces, day in, day out. Hot take, but I think it should be legal to redact AI bros. We need to redact AI artist. We need to redact AI artist. Just to give you a mental image of how much I hate AI. I want to take the concept of AI generating, cut off its redacted, leave it to redacted. Just before it dies, I pump redacted into it so it redacted longer. And then at the end, I redacted alive until it melts into a puddle.
AI diffusion models allow a person to type a few descriptive lines of text into a computer program and receive a convincing computer-generated image as an output. AI art is like a gateway drug into hating AI because most of it sucks. It feels like an aesthetic void, and there's reasons for this. A lot of the fine-tuning ratings necessary to train popular image models like Stable Diffusion were crowdsourced from a small group of disproportionately white middle-class Americans on the Stable Diffusion Discord and photography enthusiast websites. That's part of the reason why AI art looks so offensively average. But to be fair, most art produced by humans also sucks pretty bad. Most art is average, literally by virtue of what average means. Most art produced by good artists is bad. Art is a process. It's trial and error. All artists make mostly shitty things until they don't. Bad art is ubiquitous. But some people seem to believe that AI art is not only of little to no artistic value, but a moral aberration. It steals from artists. It steals artists' jobs. Anyone who even interacts with AI image generators is participating in feeding a destructive anti-human visual homunculus that is burning the earth to the ground. Now, these are all concerns in some way rooted in a version of reality that I am sympathetic to. As I'm going to say throughout this video, I totally get where this is coming from. But we need to be careful about the types of justifications we use in our critiques. Hating AI for the wrong reasons isn't just a philosophical blunder, but the first step down a path that may end up hurting the very people we vowed to protect. So let's address some of the arguments that float around when it comes to AI art, all of which apply to larger language models as well. Then we'll talk about the ways that these arguments might actually hurt artists. Bear with me as I start the argument a little abstractly before I move into addressing the material problems at hand. First, some say that AI-generated images aren't art because... So before you finish that thought, counterpoint.
If you don't know what this is a piece called Fountain. In 1917, Marcel Duchamp, when asked to submit work to an art exhibition, had a little chuckle and submitted a urinal. The point of the piece was to provide a commentary on the notion of art. Does Duchamp's Fountain become art if it is accepted by artistic institutions? Does it become art if it performs the social function of art? The piece expands our conception of what art is, where even a found object can serve the function of art on a cultural and social level. Fountain is an early 20th century cultural touchstone and, I think, successfully initiated a conversation that few other traditional art pieces have.
I think the question of what is art isn't something that we could or should ever answer. There's always ways to subvert prior conceptions of art in good or bad ways. Tons of art forms we consider mature today were, in their time, subversive to traditional definitions of art. Take photography, for example. When it first came onto the scene, tons of art critics thought it was an aberration. Here's a quote from 1865.
Photography has reached such perfection of late that evident confusion has arisen in the minds of many persons respecting the relative difference between it and fine art. Art differs from any mechanical process in being the expression of man's delight in God's work. All labor of love must have something beyond mere mechanism at the bottom of it.
We've spent like all of human history debating the question of art to death. This question is over 100 years old. It's unsettled. There's no answer, and art is better when there is no answer. The real question is whether AI-generated images could ever be considered good or valuable art. Before we settle on an answer to that, I want to briefly address some of the arguments used to say no. Remember, this isn't about debunking or owning any libs. We want to build a critique with principles consistent with building the foundation of the world we want to create. AI art is bad because AI art requires other people's work. First, all art requires other people's work. All art builds on traditions, cultural customs, and prior artistic languages. No art is made in a vacuum, and no artist works completely alone. There is always some sort of inspiration or cultural context one is working in. All art requires other people's work, other people's labor. But let's address this even more directly. Let's just say, for the sake of this argument, that you believe that intellectual property is a good thing. There are already art forms that most would consider good art forms that use other people's work.
Collage art uses other people's images, often without permission. Collage art plays a huge role in 20th century art, and tons of it is freaking awesome. Some pieces are more transformative than others. Sherry Levine's President's Collage series simply cuts out pieces from magazines in the shape of American presidents' heads. And this shit is in the MoMA. Many of these artistic practices are rooted in certain histories, communities, and norms. They require specialized knowledge, and oftentimes AI art breaks the norms on which these practices are established and doesn't really require specialized knowledge. But let's put a temporary pin in that fact about AI art. If we are simply asking the question, can you make good and valuable art by using other people's work, then the answer is obviously yes. The real question is, should we be against the specific way that generative AI uses other people's work? We'll pick up on this point later.
Next, AI art is bad because AI art takes no skill. Is an art piece good by virtue of the technical skill involved in its creation? I don't think so.
Fountain is literally just a urinal, but the cultural, social, and political context of its creation creates an art experience that I think warrants calling it valuable art. Untitled, also known as Perfect Lovers, is one of my favorite art pieces, but in a literal description is literally just 2 clocks on a wall. The clocks are initially set to the same time, but over the course of the exhibition, slowly fall out of sync. But the impact comes from understanding the story behind the art. The artist, Felix Gonzalez Torres, was an openly gay man. His partner was diagnosed with AIDS in 1987 and faced what seemed to be a certain death. In a letter he wrote to his lover in 1988, Gonzalez Torres drew a picture of the 2 perfect clocks. He writes, "Don't be afraid of the clocks. They are our time. Time has been so generous to us. We imprinted time with the sweet taste of victory. We conquered fate by meeting at a certain time in a certain space. We are a product of the time, therefore we give back credit where it is due. Time."
So anyone can put 2 clocks on a wall and synchronize them. In fact, this piece comes with instructions so that anyone can install it anywhere. But the fact that it is Gonzalez Torres directing these clocks into space, whether it is me, you, or him who puts it on the wall, gives it a certain cultural, personal, and political import. Does this mean that most AI artists engage with the cultural, personal, and political complexities of their art products? No, and that's a fine reason to critique an AI-generated image. But if your contention with AI art is it takes no technical skill, then you'd have to disregard some of the most impactful art ever created in this same vein. Next, AI art is bad because art requires creative intent and control. Some people think that good art needs to have some sort of artistic intent behind it. You shouldn't submit yourself to the whim of some sort of mechanical process. Your art needs to have some big creative vision behind it. Since an AI-generated image is allegedly random and without intent, it can't be good art.
Jackson Pollock was one of the most influential artists of the 20th century. He's known for his highly abstract drip paintings, which, at the time of creation, divided critics of the art world. Pollock would place the canvas on the floor, walk around it, and splash paint in different directions, often with a bit of jazz playing in the background. His art speaks to what is possible when you let the process of creation take over. Striking images, pure expression, a commentary on what it means to visually represent. Similarly, street photography is another art form that is often subject to the random will of fate. Street photographers capture the everyday. They may hold the camera and choose the exposure, but they don't have complete control over their subjects, their environments, or the final outcome. Some go in without intentions and let the environment decide what the art experience will look like. And that's okay, that's part of the process.
Am I saying that most so-called AI artists produce something as valuable as the average abstract impressionist or a street photographer? No, I'm simply here to say that good art doesn't have to be about intent or control. It can just as easily be about submitting oneself to the whim of the universe.
On the other hand, there's an inverted version of this argument. Some argue that AI art isn't good because good art is about the process of creation, while AI art is simply about achieving a single static output. That's probably true for most people generating AI images. A lot of them do probably just want to achieve a single static output. But there are people who call themselves AI artists who also care deeply about the process. They don't just type pretty image and call it a day. Some people test different prompts, program the model's parameters, engineer and train the model themselves, provide their unique code, or edit the generated image in software to attain a desired result. This all seems to fit most people's idea of what an art process looks like.
We'll talk more about these individuals later in this section, but the point is, whether you think art should be about process or intent, there's always someone that subverts your expectation. And that's a good thing. Art should subvert our traditional notions of what it should be. Next. AI art is bad because it represents the pure commodification of art.
In November of 2024, Coca-Cola released a Christmas commercial made with AI. The response on Twitter was overwhelmingly negative. I hate it. AI has no place in creativity. This is the most soulless Christmas ad I have ever seen. I'm sorry, but this is utterly soulless. Art is dying.
Coca-Cola using AI? Wow, whatever happened to respecting the ancient artistic practice of mass-produced soda commercials? Let's be real for a second, guys. It's a Coke commercial. It's always soulless. It's always commodification. It's always slop. Advertising is the commodification of audiovisual language in the interest of the market. The fact that it's made by an AI simply means that a human no longer is a vessel of an already soulless process. By relying on the figure of the human, of what makes art good, you're, in a way, giving the system a pass. The culture industry does not suddenly become insidious when AI is behind it. It was always predatory and extractive. Whether the vessel for capital is human or non-human, it is always already slop.
Fellow YouTuber Overset Text makes cool videos on graphic design, and on a video on graphic design ethics, he said this.
Graphic designers, we are one of the biggest arms of capitalism there is. Because a lot of us just think that we're here to make beautiful things, and I think that's the dangerous part of design. If the design is really good, is it leading us to a good place?
Wait, art is being commodified? Somebody do something. Somebody call someone. It's no secret that the means of artistic production are being hoarded by the few in the service of the markets. It's been that way for a long time. Disney, Warner, Comcast, whatever are the 21st century equivalents to the aristocratic art patrons. Commercial art is today's vessel for bourgeois libidinal investments. I just wanted to use the word libidinal. You can blame my bourgeois libidinal investments for that, but it doesn't make it any less true. The commodification of art did not start with AI, though AI certainly has the potential to exacerbate it. But again, art as a commodity, this isn't a new conversation. Remember all those goddamn soup cans? Why did he do that?
Commodities as art? Mass culture as art? This post-Enlightenment critical dribble is a little old. The Frankfurt School critiqued the culture industry in like 1947. If your complaints don't even predate the post-World War II hegemonic liberal order, then don't even talk to me. Art is an industry. It's a market, and it's been one for over a century, and media production is owned by the few. It's a bad situation, and one AI could potentially exacerbate. But the key thing to understand here is that AI is a symptom. Understood literally, AI is just a bunch of math in a computer. The material problem we need to address is who controls it, who uses it, who trains it, who shapes what it looks like and what political function it plays. What does it train on? That's the question. But if AI is a symptom, what's the disease?
Well, we might be able to understand the underlying issue a bit better if we understand the material interests at play. I think that, for better or worse, the critique of AI technologies with the most potential, the most cultural and political purchase, and perhaps the most consequences for the future of AI is this. AI art is bad for art because it steals from artists and displaces them. And this is the framework upon which it all hinges. It's quite likely that you believe at least the sentiment behind it. In some ways, I do too. But in some ways, I don't. Not because I hate artists, but because our system is so f***ed that even if, on the surface, this argument seems to support a certain set of class interests, it might actually not. Let's take a critical look at the statement, how it manifests, who tends to use it, and the consequences of making this claim uncritically. AI image generators require training. That means taking huge databases of images scraped from the internet. Some people consider this art theft. In our current super awesome system, we're supposed to address our artistic grievances through the system of copyright. But what is copyright? Well, in a capitalist society, we have this concept of property. That is, we have this concept of owning things and having the right to decide what happens to those things. In capitalism, creative works, like art, are considered intellectual property. I drew this picture of us. I hope you like it. The content of this image is my intellectual property. This class of property is protected by copyright law. Now, if I wanted to sell this copy, you could buy it, but you wouldn't own the intellectual property or the content of the image. You'd own one physical copy, which becomes your personal property, but you can't make copies of it or sell them. You can't take credit for making it. Not only because that would really hurt my feelings, but because it would violate my copyright. Since I own the copyright, I can take credit for the work and control how the content is distributed. Copyright was created for two main reasons: to monetarily incentivize creativity and to solve the problem of people profiting and taking credit from someone else's creative work. Copyright, in theory, gives creators the right to control who can distribute and claim ownership over creative works. The key point here is that, from the perspective of the capitalist state, art functions as a specific category of property. When AI blasted onto the scene like 3 beers worth of pee, this kind of fundamentally challenged these notions of art and authorship, especially in a legal framework. AI-generated work doesn't really fit into capitalism's intellectual property rights framework, since, in most cases of AI image use, there's no human artist for copyright law to protect and incentivize. But there are humans on the other side of the equation. Since AI image models require human-produced artwork in training, artists began to feel as if the owners of AI image models were exploiting their labor. After all, artists don't consent to their work being used in the training data, and they don't get compensation for their work being used in training. In fact, someone could even use these models to generate an image in an artist-specific style, which, in the eyes of a ruthless market, threatens the livelihoods of independent artists. So what could one do in this situation? Well, some artists decided to knock on the door of the US judiciary and sue the crap out of AI companies for copyright infringement. Artists felt as if AI violated artists' property rights, and so they turned to the law.
This is cartoonist Sarah Anderson. You might be familiar with her webcomic, Sarah Scribbles. It has a particular doodly hand-drawn style, so it's pretty easy to recognize. In October of 2022, someone on Twitter sent her an AI-generated image that used her name as a prompt. In horror, she tested the image generator herself. She was shocked at how the computer was able to pick up on key elements of her style. With some technical improvement, I could see how the process of imitating my work would soon become fast and streamlined, and the many dark potentials bubbled to the forefront of my mind. I felt violated. In 2023, Anderson, alongside artist Carla Ortiz and Kelly McKernan, filed the class action lawsuit against a few AI companies, including Stability AI, the company behind AI image generator Stable Diffusion. And they weren't the first or only ones. There are currently dozens of lawsuits that have been filed against companies that own generative AI models. And while we often hear about the conflict between artists and AI models as a battle between small-time independent creatives versus big tech, the truth is far more complicated. Let's start with Anderson v. Stability, a lawsuit that, I feel, captures much of the essence of the artist's position against AI. The plaintiffs, Anderson, Ortiz, and McKernan, allege that AI models constitute copyright infringement, both in the training and output stage. They have a few main claims. One, that training AI models like Stable Diffusion illegally acquires and stores copies of artists' work without consent, constituting copyright infringement. Two, that all images generated by the AI image generator models are derivatives of the original artist's work and harm the intended market for the work.
Some of you in the audience might agree with the thought behind the lawsuit and the intentions of the plaintiffs. But the problem is, the entire initial argument here is based on a complete misrepresentation of how AI image generators work. All right, let's play a little game called I Explain How AI Image Generation Works.
An AI image generator is basically a type of giant computer algorithm called a neural network. Fundamentally, a neural network is a bunch of scary math that a computer uses to recognize patterns. You can use neural networks to train generative AI that recognizes visual patterns and creates visual outputs. These AI image generators use a process called diffusion to transform random noise into images based on what they've learned during training. Imagine we pop billions of images into a neural network to train the model. Let's say one of these images is this goddamn dog. The model gradually adds a bunch of random visual noise to the picture and analyzes how the noise alters the image. Through this, the model captures the structure of the image, not just at the pixel level, but in terms of larger visual patterns. With a large enough dataset, the model statistically models deeper patterns in how noise transforms the content of different pictures. When it analyzes something like dog's fur across millions of images, it learns to mathematically capture the concept of fuzziness. It doesn't store individual images, but instead captures statistical relationships between visual features across its training set. Visual features like fuzziness or brown color. The models even capture larger conceptual variables like dogness versus catness. Large diffusion models capture millions of variables, including visual concepts that we don't even have words for. After training the model on all these images, it's able to generate new images. When we ask it to generate a brand new image from scratch with a text prompt like dog, the model starts with pure noise and then works backward, step by step, removing the noise in a way that aligns with its statistical representation of what a dog is. Since it isn't memorizing images, but instead learning the relationships between shapes, textures, and colors, it can now generate completely new images that correspond to the initial prompt. So the AI model, in a way, learns what a dog looks like without copying a specific dog or needing to store any dog training images in the final model. The model builds a pathway that captures the mathematical essence of dogness, allowing it to conjure up an infinite amount of new dogs, none of which ever actually existed. In summary, AI models train on a dataset of billions of images to mathematically understand visual concepts so that it can reconstruct these concepts based on certain prompts. So, no, the model themselves don't contain the training images within them. If they did, then models like Stable Diffusion would be too large to run locally on your personal computer. Like, it would be literally physically, mathematically impossible. Yet Stable Diffusion can.
Yet the artists in the Stability v. Anderson case describe AI models in extremely misleading ways. The plaintiffs claim that AI models contain compressed copies of the copyrighted works within them. That's not true. They state that a diffusion model can be considered an alternative way of storing a copy of those images. Not really. They argue that a model is similar to having a directory on your computer of billions of JPEG image files. No, it's not. They call AI image generators complex collage tools. They are not. Diffusion models aren't collage machines. They don't copy, nor do they contain compressed copies of anything. They are models in the literal sense of the word. They are a computer's mathematical model of visual concepts.
The proliferation of these arguments has led to a widespread misunderstanding of how diffusion works, including the popular misconception that AI models somehow combine all their training images into its outputs. The artists in the Stability case claim, every output image from the system is derived exclusively from latent images, which are copies of copyrighted images. For these reasons, every hybrid image is necessarily a derivative work. But that's just not how it works, neither legally nor technically. The output images aren't derived from the latent images. AI models do not generate with reference to the specific training data at all. They generate images based on a mathematical model of visual concepts. The artists even admit that none of the stable diffusion output images provided in response to a particular text prompt is likely to be a close match for any specific image in the training data. And this is kind of a problem when they're trying to claim that literally all AI-generated outputs constitute legally derivative works. According to copyright law, a derivative work is one which substantially borrows the expression of ideas from an existing work. But that's hard to do if, as the artists here have admitted, the allegedly derivative images aren't actually likely to reflect the visual likeness of the work it's trained on. Maybe that's why the judge in the Anderson v. Stability case dismissed these claims entirely. Some, like the plaintiffs, still claim that AI models somehow store compressed versions of their training data, constituting copyright infringement. They don't. The plaintiff's argument that they do relies not on technical evidence, but off-the-cuff marketing claims repeated by Stability CEO Imad Mostaq.
We took 100,000 gigabytes of images and compressed it to a 2 gigabyte file that can recreate any of those and iterations of those.
Betty regrets that now, huh? While that does look damning, Stability formally denied this interpretation of their model in court. And considering that Mostaq has a history of making exaggerated and misleading claims, it wouldn't be out of character for him to exaggerate in this instance too. Plus, he's no longer the CEO. Now, some AI image models in some instances reproduce specific images or styles if you use specific techniques. But this isn't an inherent feature of AI models as the artists in the lawsuit claim. It's a bug that happens as a result of the way models analyze visual information. To get an AI-generated result that closely resembles an existing piece of work, a few different things have to go wrong. The model has to be trained on a small, poor quality dataset and/or a dataset with multiple copies of a particular image. For example, an extremely famous work of art. It's also likely that you're very intentionally prompting the model to mimic a specific part of the data. None of this means that the models store their training data. If you had a human artist trace the same picture of the Grinch all day, every day for 20 years, that human artist would probably get pretty good at reproducing that exact picture of the Grinch on command without needing the original image. Here's one example that gets used as evidence of AI models copying their training data. First, this is a model from 3 years ago. Second, look at how specific this prompt has to be. Baby shower turned meteor shower, Anne Hathaway fights off aliens in sci-fi comedy. The shower. So yeah, you have to be intentionally trying to copy in order to actually copy. But calling all AI models plagiarism machines or all uses of AI theft just because they can enable bad actors to exploit an artist's style is like calling the entire internet a piracy machine because one can Google watch Conclave movie online free. Even with complete control over the model, when the researchers from this article explicitly tried to extract training data, they were only able to do this for 2.5% of the training data. The way the plaintiffs formed their arguments are extremely misleading. In the Stability lawsuit, Exhibit I shows some results from the artists, prompting Midjourney to reproduce their work, showing their original image and 3 of Midjourney's outputs mimicking that image. These images were presented as damning evidence that maybe the models really do contain copies of its training data. That is, until you realize how they made these images. Midjourney allows users to input images as prompts to generate new images. The prompt for the 3 AI images was literally the original image and the name of the original artist. They inputted their art into Midjourney, asked it to copy the image, and now we're supposed to be shocked that it only kind of did? This isn't evidence that the model contains copies of its training data at all. But even as they tried as hard as possible to extract the training data, the images produced by Midjourney are stylistically similar, not copies. And artistic style isn't protected by copyright law. Should it be?
Oh my god, no!
But we'll return to that in a bit. The artist's lawyers repeatedly cite a paper by Nicholas Carlini et al. Carlini himself isn't the biggest fan of the way this paper is used in copyright lawsuits, so he wrote a response article. He explicitly says, "We focus our papers on privacy. This means we prompt models adversarially to measure the worst case. not the average case. The artist's lawyers also quote Carlini as saying that diffusion models are explicitly trained to reconstruct the training set. In response, he says, "I am not saying that the purpose of diffusion models is to reconstruct the training set. No one wants that. All I'm saying is that the technical way in which they are trained is different from the way the prior generation of generative models were trained." And yet this idea that all AI-generated images are art theft persists in popular discourse. The arguments in this lawsuit are incoherent, but it isn't the only lawsuit against AI that has faced pushback. In fact, the law firm representing the artists in Anderson v. Stability also represents tons of other lawsuits against generative AI companies like Meta and OpenAI using similar arguments. As in Stability, many of these claims in the other lawsuits were dismissed. The arguments made were so bad that in one of the cases, the judge actually called them nonsensical and then verbally destroyed the lawyers. "You are not doing your job. This is an important case. You and your team have taken on a case that you are either unwilling or unable to litigate properly." Yet somehow, a bunch of media outlets have reported that the artists in Anderson v. Stability are scoring victories in their cases, mostly echoing a tweet from plaintiff Carla Ortiz calling recent developments a big win. But have they actually won big? Not really. The win Ortiz described here was just that a few of the plaintiff's claims survived a motion to dismiss. That's legal speak for the judge is forced to assume that everything you're saying is true just to see if your argument could maybe hold up in court. It's one of the lowest bars in the entire process. And even then, some of the claims didn't make it. That's extremely telling. And here's where it gets a little uncomfortable. Oftentimes, individuals with legitimate fears get pulled into lawsuits driven by legal teams who might have other goals: publicity, political positioning, money, whatever. I'm not necessarily stating that that's what's happening here, but if the technical claims of the lawsuit are this flimsy, if other judges have called these lawyers incompetent, you gotta wonder, are the plaintiffs being misled about how good of a case they have? I don't know, I'm just asking questions. Please don't sue me, but those are lawyers. Lawyers always suck. Let's consider for a moment the question of art theft on grounds outside of the law. Even if AI images aren't legally copyright infringement, there still might be other ethical problems with making them. Some people have environmental and labor concerns. We'll get to that. Let's stick with art for now. Some argue that since training AI models requires the use of artists' work without their consent, that it's not okay. Well, collage artists use other people's work without their permission, yet we'd consider that a legitimate art form. Sometimes it's okay to use other people's work without their permission. Even the draconian institution of US copyright law agrees with this idea through the concept of fair use. In some specific instances, people can use other people's work without permission and without it being copyright infringement. Underlying fair use is the idea that through the transformation of existing works, one can produce new artistically and socially valuable creative works or educational tools. For example, through fair use, it's legal for movie critics to use portions of copyrighted works like movies to support their commentary. It's why YouTube commentary videos exist in the first place. Hi there! Do you think all these media IP holders gave me permission to use their work to call their characters gay? No. Yet I can. Fair use does a lot of good in enabling media criticism, academic commentary, educational documentaries, and the free access of information on search engines. It's also a doctrine that protects creative works like satire, visual art, journalism, music, and more. Some, like the Copyright Alliance and the plaintiffs in Anderson v. Stability, argue that generative AI training isn't fair use because the outputs compete with the intended market of the original work. While it's absolutely true that some outputs can compete with the market for the original work, constituting copyright infringement, that doesn't mean that the entire model itself is infringement. Just like with search engines or social media platforms, just because a technology can facilitate infringement doesn't mean the tech itself is infringing. But these lawsuits aren't targeting specific outputs, they're targeting entire models. In an ideal world, we want to encourage inspiration, iteration, and artistic innovation. In an ideal world, we shouldn't need to ask every artist for permission to transform or comment on their work. In an ideal world. But we don't live in an ideal world. Even if we concede that AI models are unlikely to generate images that resemble their training images, or that they don't copy the original images or store them, we still live in a world where AI models pose a direct threat to artists' livelihoods. So, of course, artists aren't going to want their work to be used to train the machine that's taking their job. This is the artist's key grievance and the hardest to address. AI hurts artists because it materially affects their ability to support themselves. Big media companies are going to use AI to avoid paying artists. Malicious actors are going to use AI models to copy artists' unique styles. And without artists, art will not survive. AI will kill art. Or will it? What do you think would happen if the judge ruled in favor of the artist's instability v. Anderson? What might that world look like? What direction would that take us in? Would independent artists really stand to benefit?
People often think of the battle over AI art as the conflict between the interests of small independent artists versus large multinational corporations. But the full picture is more complicated, and in many ways more insidious. In fact, large multinational corporations stand to benefit from the artists' arguments in cases like Stability v. Anderson. The anti-AI art movement might actually result in the largest expansion of media corporations' power over copyright law in recent memory. Here's the thing about copyright law. Capitalism doesn't really care about artists. It cares about property, and therefore the property-owning class. In the United States, the dominant intellectual property-owning class aren't independent artists. It's the mouse. It's Warner Media, NBC Universal, Paramount, Comcast, not you. When it comes to generative AI, the property-owning class is doing everything it can to consolidate its power and promote its interests, even if that means misrepresenting whose interests they defend.
One of the artists in the Anderson v. Stability case is named Carla Ortiz. She's a concept artist who's worked on big-name Marvel films and video games, and she's staunchly opposed to the current uses of generative AI. She's also a board member of the Concept Art Association, who in December of 2022 launched a GoFundMe campaign that raised nearly $300,000 for a lobbying effort marketed as protecting artists from AI technologies. So, what did this campaign do to support human artists? Well, for one, the lobbying team at the Concept Art Association joined forces with fellow intellectual property associations like the Copyright Alliance. The Copyright Alliance is a nonprofit organization that claims to represent the copyright interests of millions of individual creators and creative organizations in the United States. They're also one of the most powerful and prominent voices when it comes to generative AI and copyright. But the Copyright Alliance does good work, right? We definitely need advocacy groups like the Copyright Alliance to advocate for the interests of small-time exploited creators, like Adobe. And Disney. Okay, and NBC Universal, News Corp, Nike, Oracle, Paramount, Sony Pictures, Warner Brothers? Okay, well, that's unnerving. But these aren't the only people that the Copyright Alliance claims to represent. You can technically sign up to join the organization for free. But whose interests do you think might be disproportionately represented when someone like Troy Dow, the vice president of Disney's government relations and IP legal policy team, sits on the Copyright Alliance's board of directors? Or when their board of directors is stacked with representatives from America's largest media companies and copyright holders. And it gets worse. The Copyright Alliance has uncomfortably strong ties to the Nichols Group, a consulting firm started by former Republican Senator Don Nichols. When Nichols wasn't consistently trying to make women and gay people's lives worse, he spent much of his time as a corporate shill, supporting tax cuts for the wealthy and introducing anti-union legislation. In 2005, he started a lobbying firm called the Nichols Group, which has consistently sided with big corporate media interests like lobbying for monopolistic media mergers and against net neutrality. The Nichols Group also lobbies and/or works with really awesome people like Koch Industries, giant health insurance companies, Walmart, ExxonMobil, and Juul. You literally could not assemble a more evil list. But what does the Nichols Group have to do with the Copyright Alliance? Well, let's check the Copyright Alliance's list of staff in 2008, shortly after its founding. Nichols. That's like 25 cents! Okay, so what if tons of Nichols associates, including one of its founding partners, were on the Copyright Alliance's initial staff list? 2008 was like 100 years ago. That proves nothing. If only we had firm evidence of a nefarious connection. Something like, I don't know, a Copyright Alliance member organization sending dues directly to the Nichols Group. But I guess we'll never know. LM2 is a financial disclosure form that labor organizations with receipts of $250,000 or more are required to submit yearly. These contributions are legally required to be disclosed to the public. For example, if we look up one of the Copyright Alliance's member organizations like the Graphic Artists Guild, tons of reports about their financial transactions come up. So let's just quickly verify that they really did pay the Copyright Alliance and not the Nichols Group. Okay, everything looks good. Wait, that address looks familiar. Wait. No. Wait. No. 601 13th Street, Suite 250. That can't be, because the Copyright Alliance says they're located at 1331 F Street. Okay, well, maybe they switched addresses or something. What we need to show is that the Graphic Artists Guild sent money meant for the Copyright Alliance to what is exclusively the Nickel Group's address. Alright, so in 2017, the Graphic Artists Guild sent $10,000 to the Copyright Alliance, which is supposed to be located, as it says here, at 601 13th Street. According to the Wayback Machine in 2017, the Copyright Alliance was located at 1331 H Street, not 601 13th Street, now the Nichols Group. In 2017, they were located at, you guessed it, 601 13th Street. So, can anyone please explain why members of the Copyright Alliance have been sending thousands of dollars in member dues to a corporate lobbying group's address for at least a decade? Oh, I know why. Because the Copyright Alliance is a front.
The point is that campaigns like this GoFundMe, lawsuits like Stability v. Anderson, the Copyright Alliance's lobbying efforts all claim to represent the interests of human artists. In theory, they do, and maybe some of the artists on board with the coalition sincerely believe in the work they're doing. This video is absolutely not a call to harass all the plaintiffs of these cases, but in practice, these high-profile efforts to regulate generative AI disproportionately represent the interests of the intellectual property-owning class. Now, there are tons of independent artists who own their own intellectual property, but by far, those who stand to benefit from the expansion of copyright law are not independent artists, but the multinational corporations that the Copyright Alliance represents. The means of artistic production are disproportionately held by media giants, and copyright law keeps it that way. That's why companies like Disney have consistently led the way on copyright expansion in the US, spending millions in lobbying dollars every year. Do independent artists stand to benefit from the expansion of copyright? The answer is usually no. Here's why.
If these lawsuits were successful, the end result is not going to be that authors' works are excluded from AI training.
This is Dave Hansen. He's a copyright attorney and executive director of the Authors Alliance, a nonprofit organization that supports authors who want their work to contribute to the public good.
The end result is going to be that we will have a group of very, very large tech companies entering into licensing deals with very, very large content holders, and everybody else gets sort of left out in the cold.
For the past few years, the Authors Alliance has been raising the alarm bells about the potential consequences of expanding copyright in the name of defending artists. In response to the backlash to generative AI models like Stable Diffusion, some companies have altered their approach to AI. Adobe, for example, has vowed to build ethical AI models trained on images they say they have the legal rights to use. You can use Adobe's ethical AI model, Firefly, right now. But it turns out that the ethical AI label is more of a marketing term, considering that Adobe used work produced by another AI model, Midjourney, in its training. Stable Diffusion, the main defendant of the Anderson v. Stability case, on the other hand, is open source and free to use. Would the lawsuits and discourse against generative AI models like Stable Diffusion actually protect artists from generative AI? Or would it usher in a world where only large IP holders like Adobe or Disney can afford to develop these models?
If Stability AI is destroyed in court, generative AI wouldn't go away or pose any less of a risk to artists' jobs. It would just put control of generative AI in the hands of companies like Adobe, who can afford to license work, further consolidating power in the hands of a few media giants. Do you trust them to use that power well? Some people are fighting back. I spoke with Kit Walsh, a Harvard law-trained attorney who specializes in AI and the legal freedom of expression.
It makes it very difficult to create generative AI tools if you don't already have sort of a captive set of content that you're able to build upon. So for Adobe, that's sort of a way to exclude potential competitors.
That's really what it boils down to. Like other corporate titans racing to build AI, they're in the business of capturing the future. The Walsh spoke with me on her own behalf. She's also the director of AI at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, one of the leading nonprofits in the realm of digital civil liberties. The EFF has won tons of legal battles in the name of free expression in the digital space, from defending encryption as free speech to challenging mass surveillance and fighting for open source rights. So it's notable that they've consistently criticized how anti-AI lawsuits filed under the guise of protecting artists or the public often serve to benefit a few powerful players. If the lawsuits filed against AI companies were to succeed, what kind of implications would that have for fair use? How expansive is the definition of derivative work going to go? The logic of lawsuits like Anderson v. Stability and several other AI lawsuits could declare using stylistic elements from other artists in your work illegal. What does that mean for fan art? What does that mean if you're inspired by the way an artist uses colors, and if you want to experiment with other styles in your own unique way? Where is the line?
Most of these lawsuits have been brought as class actions, which mean that the people bringing them claim to represent you. If these lawsuits proceed, your rights are very likely to be bound up in the lawsuit, and you will be told what can and can't happen with your work with respect to AI.
The proposed legal theory behind the Anderson v. Stability court case, if accepted, could result in a world where one could copyright an artist's visual style. Thankfully, the case's plaintiffs don't have legal grounds to do that, as the judge in the case states. Artistic styles as species of aesthetic ideas or concepts are excluded from copyright protection. That's right, artistic style shouldn't really be something you can copyright. Imagine a world where Monet could have trademarked Impressionism, or if Picasso had patented Cubism. Good luck with your pathetic cones and cylinders while they last. So thank God artist styles and aesthetic ideas aren't protected. Yet. In 2023, Dana Rao was Adobe's general counsel and VP of intellectual property. Here he is at a Senate judiciary hearing on AI and copyright that same year.
We believe artists should be protected against this type of economic harm, and we propose Congress establish a new federal anti-impersonation right that would give artists the right to enforce against someone intentionally attempting to impersonate their style or likeness.
That opens up some difficult territory, doesn't it? What's the line between an artistic style and a new artistic movement? What kind of chilling effect might there be on artistic innovation if you fear a lawsuit for copying someone's style? This doesn't mean we should live in a world where it's legal to generate work that mimics an artist's style and passes it off as that artist's original work. But that's already illegal. That's called fraud.
But this battle isn't just being fought in the courts. Many of these legislative efforts try to address multiple issues at hand, like deepfakes, copyright, and misinformation, all in the name of protecting humans. But like these court cases, the ways these issues are addressed through copyright law might hurt artists more than help them.
Meet Padra, aka the Preventing Abuse of Digital Replicas Act. Like other legislation that attempts to regulate AI, it introduces protections against the misuse of digital replicas by extending federal trademark law to regulate any digital replica that contains identifying characteristics of individuals. But the law doesn't specify that it's targeting AI. Here, digital replica is defined as a computer-generated representation of an identifying characteristic of a subject, person, or, and here's the kicker, a characteristic of the creative works of the subject person, such that the use of such characteristic is likely to be associated with the subject person. So, Padra might prevent an AI Joe Rogan from endorsing gray market supplements.
It literally is increasing size and making a difference down there.
It stimulates the testes if you got those.
But it also provides a legal framework that regulates the commercial reproduction of an artist's stylistic characteristics. Padra and similar legislation could go beyond stopping fraud and start restricting creative influence. While the bill includes exemptions for expressive or artistic works, how will these be interpreted in practice? Do you think big media companies or well-off artists can't afford a malicious lawsuit or two to target small creators? putting legal pressure on artists and developers who build on existing styles, something that has been foundational to art and culture for centuries. You bet your ass they can. Our friends at Adobe have come out in support of extending trademark law to protect artistic style. But you know who doesn't support extending trademark law to encompass artistic style? Literally, the International Trademark Association. Because obviously that would be bad for art. And more importantly, why is this even necessary? As I said, fraud is already illegal. Defamation law already protects against false light depictions of individuals. Trademark law already protects against misleading endorsements. Copyright law already governs original works. So what gap is PODRA trying to fill? And who gets to decide what counts as distinctive enough to trigger these protections?
But what about the uses of AI image generation beyond art? The malicious trolls who generate images that intend to distort reality.
Let's return to the GoFundMe launched by the Concept Art Association that helped organize lobbying efforts in DC over generative AI. In addition to becoming buddies with intellectual property elites like the Copyright Alliance, they were also included in the formation of something called the Human Artistry Campaign. The Human Artistry Campaign formed in March of 2023, with the hopes of protecting human artists in the face of generative AI. Now, they're not completely against generative AI. They like AI when it does things like track your data or help them get paid. But when it comes to copyright, no. Nuh-uh. The Human Artistry Campaign, or the HAC, is a staunch supporter of one piece of legislation called the Nurture Originals, Foster Art, and Keep Entertainment Safe Act, also known as No Fakes. Not everything has to be an acronym, guys. Or as I like to call it, NetBag. No Fakes not only has the support of the HAC, but it has bipartisan support in the House and Senate. Tons of organizations have endorsed it. It has real potential to become law. According to the HAC, the act would establish a federal right to own our voices and likenesses and establish a system to fight back against non-consensual AI-generated deepfakes and voice clones.
And I get it, non-consensual deepfakes can be deeply violating and disgusting. AI's potential in exacerbating misinformation or misleading images is absolutely something that must be addressed. In no functioning society can we allow fake images like this to exist unchecked. We know Elon's feet aren't that clean. Well, sometimes the remedy is worse than the disease. The No Fakes Act would grant individuals a new intellectual property right to their voice and likeness. Now, you might be thinking, well, what about things like news or satire? Good question. The bill states that typical free speech exemptions would apply. For example, you wouldn't be in violation of the bill if you use a digital replica in bona fide news, or if the use is consistent with the public interest. But the question is, who would determine what the hell bona fide news is? Let's say an independent journalist on Facebook wants to cover the fact that this picture was hilariously broadcast on a TV at the HQ of the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and the presenter shows the unedited image to just, hold space. Is that bona fide news? Who's gonna decide that? Trump's Supreme Court? Your local Republican-appointed judge? The billionaire shadow entity that wears the skin suit of Facebook's CEO?
We're already seeing unprecedented threats to free speech under the current administration, with Trump throwing tons of lawsuits at any media outlet who says things he doesn't like. Even if Trump's lawsuits don't have legal merit, it doesn't matter. Litigation is expensive. Even if you win your case, you might be millions in the hole. So even the biggest of media juggernauts who can afford to settle a few lawsuits might choose to err on the side of caution rather than risk being sued for criticizing King D. Any regulatory framework, like No Fakes and similar legislation that could make speech and independent journalism even more difficult in the current climate, poses a massive threat to public discourse. Damn it. Sorry, I've just received a DMCA takedown notice from Heckler's Industries, despite the fact that this video is fair use. Fallacious DMCA notices are common on YouTube and often serve as a way for companies to target creators' free speech. While DMCA has a counter notice system to address this, the No Fakes Act does not. Malicious actors could file frivolous AI-generated content complaints, pressure platforms to take down legitimate speech for fear of legal repercussions, with massive consequences for creators, and limited recourse to easily restore content if the system is abused.
Bills like No Fakes might actually increase the possibility that artists lose control over their likeness or work. Big media companies would likely be incentivized to use the framework of this legislation to pressure less established artists into selling over the right to their work or likeness early in their careers, giving big media companies, movie studios, music labels, or talent agencies the exclusive right and control to make AI-generated versions of someone's work or identity. Again and again, legislation that's peddled as protecting human artists will likely result in a world that gives large media companies more control over artists and their work than ever before. That might be why the ACLU, the Center for Democracy and Technology, the EFF, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, and many more organizations have spoken out against laws like No Fakes and similar bills like the No AI Fraud Act. In a letter these organizations wrote to legislators, they stated,
"We all share the goal of maximizing AI's benefits while minimizing harms to artists, creators, and the general public. Unfortunately, the No AI Fraud Act and No Fakes Act sail wide of the mark, sweeping in far too much legitimate speech, increasing the risk that performers and their heirs could lose control over their performing rights, and endangering wide swaths of non-commercial, First Amendment protected activities. We applaud Congress for its desire to protect consumers and creators. Unfortunately, the No AI Fraud Act and No Fakes Act would make the situation worse rather than better."
While I sympathize with those who want to regulate the most horrific and grotesque uses of AI technology, we have to be extremely careful when those who claim to fight in our names propose legislation that's way too broad or that consolidates too much power in the hands of the few.
What's being proposed is let's take as broad a sort of commercial property framework of right of publicity, make that a federal rule, make it a lot harder to talk about famous people, and give them essentially more ways to sue you for talking about them in ways that you don't like.
But in the face of an uncertain future, what route should artists take? Aren't lawsuits or legislation the only thing we have?
I think, for most creators, they have been sort of fed this line that we are in a world that you have to pick a side. You have to pick which industry titan you line up with. Do you line up with big tech or do you line up with big content? And you need to be a cheerleader for one of these sides. And so if big content is your side and they want more copyright, then you must want more copyright too. And I think that's kind of a lie that a lot of people have been fed, that neither of them are acting in your interest.
In whose name are we really fighting for? In this debate, again and again, we see individuals invoke the idea of the human artist, support human artists, the human artistry campaign. The figure of the artist haunts this discourse as the subject of some faux emancipatory humanism it claims to profess. But in no place are the risks of humanism clearer when emancipatory humanism becomes reactionary humanism. We forget what it is we're actually fighting against. When we're having this conversation on AI and art, we forget that we're having this conversation in a particular place, at a particular time, bound by the frameworks given to us by our socio-political conditions. Copyright hasn't always existed. Art is as old as human culture. Law is as old as civilization, yet copyright law is only 200 years old. So why did copyright and intellectual property emerge when it did? Now, we know why copyright exists on paper. Our society has decided that it's valuable to give creators control over who can distribute and claim ownership over creative works because, supposedly, this economically and socially incentivizes artistic and intellectual innovation. Now, in theory, that might sound like a good idea, but probably because you're living in a capitalist society in the 21st century where the philosophies behind copyright and intellectual property are drilled into our brains. To understand our current artistic crisis, we have to briefly recount the history of artistic production. What is art? Not in a philosophical sense, we could go on forever about that, but what function does art play in our society? Since creative works have the potential to make money, they're treated as a form of property. Intellectual property. This should all be a familiar bedtime story, but underlying property rights is the Western cultural figure of the human, as that entity which has these inalienable rights. Remember the point that I keep bringing up about humanism? Our entire social order, our understanding of the world is premised on a specific Western Enlightenment idea of what it means to be human and how our society should be organized to accommodate that meaning. When some individuals tried to seek copyright protections for AI works, it didn't fit into the social schema. So the US Copyright Office stood its ground, and a judge ruled that human authorship is an essential part of a valid copyright claim. So even though Western humanism seems like an abstract philosophical idea, it's a framework that underlies how we think about governance, culture, and yes, art. The consequences of this philosophy are vast, but in terms of art, it's the reason many of us believe art can only ever be the product of human individual genius, originality, and innovation. But that's not what art can only ever be, because that's not the only thing art has ever been. This way of thinking about art as an individual human product emerged out of a particular set of historical conditions. In the medieval period, the concept of artistic originality or creativity wasn't really a thing. This type of thinking wasn't just discouraged, it didn't even fit into the framework of what people thought art's whole purpose was. Medieval culture considered creative work as a form of skilled labor, similar to, say, making a shoe. You were expected to master a set of traditional rules, imitate the existing aesthetic order of beauty, and maintain cultural continuity. Your craft was not your craft, but an expression of God's creation. The name of the game was mimicry, both in theory and practice. Reusing, copying, and compiling existing works was totally normal and encouraged. Imitation was unironically the highest form of flattery. Take Shakespeare. His works borrow heavily from existing plots, characters, literary figures, and even entire phrases. But really, writers lifting from writers was just the convention. A modern reader might call Shakespeare a fraud or a plagiarist for that, but in Shakespeare's day, the word plagiarism didn't even exist. It's easy to take our 21st century lens and say, wow, art sucked back then. Art today is so much better for encouraging originality. There's really no justification for saying one approach to art is better or worse. It's just different. The 17th century produced Hamlet, and the 21st century produced Shrek. Two different conditions of artistic production, two different masterpieces. But what changed between the medieval period and today? How did we arrive at the figure of the author as we know it today? That of the individual motivated by their original internal inspiration, their genius, their mind, their own personal humanity. Well, something about the structure of society changed. New forms of social coercion and socioeconomic structures necessitated a rethinking of human life itself.
We started to assign texts to authors when the church wanted to punish someone for heresy. So if Galileo puts out a book about the Copernican revolution in the solar systems, we want to figure out who is articulating the heresy so we can torture them. It was really about penal aspects.
Around the early 17th century, hegemonic institutions like the church wanted to organize and control ideas in new ways. This required a conceptual shift. An author couldn't just function as a person who compiled and copied the sacred order. You can't punish the sacred order, but you can punish a person. To enact this framework, the author had to become an entity that the state could hold responsible for their work. Even as the church lost its societal grip with the rise of the modern secular capitalist state in the 18th century, dominant institutions still needed a way to suppress transgressive ideas. With the rise of the modern legal system came the rise of the modern carceral state, and an accompanying ideology of individual discipline. Through this lens, authorship slowly became codified as a legal concept, as a way to control the flow of meaning and shape it to conform within a new capitalist system of private property. Creative works were now conceived as products of individual minds. The author was no longer a great compiler, but a figure whose work reflected the character of the writer. By attaching work to an individual's mind, soul, and identity, the social system could hold that individual economically and socially accountable for their creations. Within this framework, the state could punish you, an individual, for writing transgressive material, as the English court did to Oscar Wilde when they used evidence of homoerotic themes in his work to demonstrate gross indecency. But the system could also reward you for work that fits well within the social schema through new legal frameworks, copyright, and intellectual property.
But for all of this to work, people really had to believe in the idea of intellectual property. But if the church wasn't as fashionable in the 18th and 19th century, What changed in the culture to shift the notion of authorship? Alongside these new social systems came a series of new cultural truths about art that helped reinforce the ideology behind intellectual property. At the end of the 18th century, this new cultural, aesthetic, and philosophical movement called Romanticism changed the ways that the public thought about art. People no longer saw art as a craft chasing old traditions, but as the expression of human subjectivity, individual inspiration, and internal genius.
As authors ceased to think of themselves as either craftsmen, gentlemen, or amanuenses of the divine spirit, a recognizably different, more romantic vision of authorship began to emerge. At first, it was found mainly in self-serving tracts, but little by little it spread through the culture so that by the middle of the 18th century, it had come to be seen as a universal truth about art. Before the Romantic period, things like painting and music used to be funded by the patronage of aristocrats and kings. But as the old European aristocracies fell, art patronage was replaced with market forces. To sell your work, you needed to take a more individualist approach, one in which art was the product of your original and singular genius. Through these different forces, the development of the modern penal system, the regime of intellectual property under capitalist markets, and the Romantic movement, we see our modern notion of authorship take form.
Our current notions of what art is, what art should be, all of this is socially determined. The philosophy behind how we understand creativity has massive implications in the ways we regulate people's lives. The question is, how long are we gonna let the humanisms of the past write our future? When we introduce the question of AI without this history, it might feel like AI represents the death of art or the death of the human soul, but really, AI represents the death of a particular idea about art, a particular idea of the human soul. And maybe, just maybe, these things needed to die? Maybe the system of copyright doesn't actually serve artistic innovation, but the interests of a particular intellectual property-owning class. Maybe the idea of a soul is an archetype that ties people to old myths of purification and control that might actually be destructive to marginalized peoples. Maybe our Western ideas of human or man were built to dehumanize populations deemed in excess of certain 18th century social systems. Maybe our ideas of human freedom are actually discourses of control.
But let there be no misunderstanding. It is not that a real man, the object of knowledge, philosophical reflection, or technological intervention, has been substituted for the soul, the illusion of theologians. The man described for us, whom we are invited to free, is already in himself the effect of a subjection more profound than himself. A soul inhabits him and brings him to existence, which is itself a factor in the mastery that power exercises over the body. The soul is the effect and instrument of a political anatomy. The soul is the prison of the body.
I understand why artists are attached to systems of intellectual property and copyright. It's often the only model of artistic compensation that's presented to us. AI brings serious problems to light. How will artists make a living? How will art survive? How do we stop misinformation? But as we can see, so many of the efforts to regulate AI consolidate power into the hands of large corporations who will exacerbate these problems. But AI art is not a malignant tumor that needs to be stamped out from our system. Our system was always dysfunctional. There's no going back to pre-AI systems in which corporations were already underpaying and exploiting artists. There's no going back to a system in which the means of artistic production are overwhelmingly held by a few corporations. So what then? In an ideal world, maybe we abolish copyright, seize the means of production everywhere, and simply provide people what they need to live. The good old communist hypothesis. But in the meantime, a massive expansion of intellectual property and copyright law is not the way to get there. I know we have concerns about how do we give people credit for their work without copyright? Or how do we compensate art without intellectual property? Fellow YouTuber Shitty Kickflips made a great video about the subject of AI and art and copyright and makes a great point.
I support copyright abolition because I fundamentally value the rights of art and the audience above artistic ownership. The fundamental misunderstanding that people do not grasp about copyright abolition is that it does not seek to fix the issue with fraud. It seeks to fix the issue of fascistically controlling the free flow of art.
But you don't have to be a copyright abolitionist to want to see a world where art, ideas, and creativity are accessible to everyone. Hey, you're probably watching this video for free. Do you know why? Because a small collective of people have decided that they want to organically support this channel and fund my work. At the end of the day, I don't care about owning this video as property as long as I can feed myself, take credit for the labor put into this video, and keep making art. If you want to YouTube poop this video, do it. So much of some of the greatest pieces of art I've seen have been made by independent creators funded by niche communities. We don't need giant copyright holders to give us their Disney bucks to make good art, or even make a living making good art. I don't need to make $1 billion for a giant corporation to be happy making art. Neither do you. We no longer have to ask for permission, nor should we want to. Now that we know that art has been thought of in different ways in the past, perhaps it's time for us to think of art in a different way for the future. Art as a commons, as a public good from which anyone can iterate and transform. Free-flowing ideas accessible to everyone, to learn from, to build from, to contribute to. And yeah, I'll say it, I think AI-generated work can be a part of that future.
In the late 19th century, when photography came on the scene, artists, especially portrait artists, were scared shitless of how photography could destroy their livelihood. They argued that photography was just a mechanical and soulless form that could never be true art. But photography didn't kill visual art. Instead, it forced visual artists to reconsider the unique strengths of their medium. Yeah, sure, photography might render realistic portraiture useless in some ways, but on the other hand, maybe photography liberates the painter. As photographer Edward Western states, photography has, or will eventually, negate much painting, for which the painter should be deeply grateful, relieving him, as it were, from certain public demands. Representation, objective seeing. YouTuber Jonas Cheka made a great video on the ways AI art might model itself after this history.
In short, the tension between painting and photography led artists on both sides to ask, what can my medium do? What is my medium capable of that others are not? The exploration of a medium and its possibilities is really one of the most wonderful things about art.
With the advent of photography, the visual artist was free to depict the world in unique ways, to explore visual representations of fleeting impressions, abstract expressions, the unique texture of painting, surreal and unreal imagination. AI-generated images are often noted for their grotesque representations. The warped and unnerving visuals elicit disgust in an intriguing way. Doesn't that kind of resonate with the current cultural waves of body horror and anxiety? Cindy Sherman is an American artist famous for photographic self-portraits in which she depicts herself as different cultural archetypes. Many of her characters feel familiar in unsettling ways, whether it be by depicting the morass of womanhood, class, race, and culture, or sometimes the disquieting distortions of selfhood that force us to confront our obsession with self-image. Her work resonates especially in the 21st century, as self-representation is so ubiquitous in our lives. In 2023, Sherman began experimenting with AI-generated images on Instagram. The unsettling themes of distorted selfhood in her work fit well with AI's surreal and disturbing inhuman depictions. I'm really curious about AI and what it does to images. I was playing around with one of these face-tuning apps, the ones that are designed to make you look better. Only I was making myself look weird or just different. So I put selfies into one of the AI programs. It creates various types of you: anime, cosmic, apocalyptic, etc. So it was a sort of double manipulation. Yet even some brief experiments with AI, experiments that make total thematic and artistic sense for Sherman, attracted a ton of backlash. And when I put a whole bunch of these new images on Instagram, people were furious. They were like, oh my god, I can't believe you're using AI. Your work is so much better than this. It's as if I'm presenting this as my own work, which seems so ridiculous. I'm just experimenting. It's like a sketchbook. Not all AI art is tech bro slop. Most people have this impression of AI artists as tech bros who sit in a room, type pretty anime girl into Midjourney, and then post shitty AI trailers on YouTube. But That's not what AI image generation has to look like. There are people legitimately invested in the unique artistic potentials of AI. One such collective of people is called Away, or Are We Art Yet? They have a pretty strict code of ethics. They're anti-tech fascism, they're anti-corporate, anti-impersonation, and respect the wishes of artists who don't want their style used in the AI process. I spoke to the collective's founder, Reach. Her art process looks a lot like traditional art processes. She goes into her work with artistic intention, she programs the different parameters of the model she's using, and rephrases the prompt until she gets a pretty specific desired result. There's tons of programming skill and math that goes into it, which, unless you have a principal disagreement with the decades-long history of computer-generated and digital art, sounds like it fits even the most anti-AI definition of an art process. But even then, I don't think it should matter, because all definitions of art are embedded in a social and political context that is subject to change. New technologies always seem like they're going to kill art, but instead usually change how we think about art.
Back then, this was all fairly new stuff, and people were very resistant to the whole idea of going digital.
This concept of a computer that could draw these shapes for you, we were introducing a whole new way of thinking.
This rejection won't destroy AI, it will just ensure that it ends up in the wrong hands. Because in the right hands, human artists can use AI to experiment, speed up a previously tedious process, provide references or textures, or generate interesting work in new ways.
A recent music video by the musician Cuco used AI in its process as well. The process started with assets hand-drawn by the artist Paul Flores, which were then used to train an AI model that helped generate more assets in the artist's style. The animation team then drew basic animations that were then generatively inked and colored. The music video used a combination of human-produced 3D animation combined with a 2D style, and the AI model helped transfer the artist's style between different steps. AI also helped generate some smaller, transitional animations between different frames. Here, AI wasn't used to replace entire teams, but to help an artist-led project that otherwise wouldn't have existed. Wow, this doesn't sound like lazy slop, does it? It kind of sounds like an iterative process.
The thing with using these AI tools is it's not necessarily a linear approach. Everything is very iterative and dynamic with lots of trial and error.
Did AI automate away some human labor? Sure, as much as a pattern brush does, or pre-existing 3D assets in movies, or Flash animation, or using a Premiere animation preset. All of these things replace human labor and cut costs. But without cost cutting, the funds for independent projects wouldn't magically appear. Instead, these projects just wouldn't exist in the first place. This is what automation does. It takes away opportunities and it creates them.
Rather than removing them from the process, it actually allowed them to do a lot more. So a small team can dream a lot bigger.
Maybe you think all AI-generated images look like slop. Maybe you think you can always tell. Not only has this mindset hurt human artists with false accusations, but studies have consistently shown that most people can't always tell. So one day, you're gonna come across an image made by AI, and you're not gonna know. Perhaps you think that image had no artist, but neither does a breeze or a cloud. Yet these things have meaning. Life-changing, gut-wrenching meaning. Because we give them meaning. I'd like to live in a world where meaning is not predetermined, where no system is inevitable, where no way of life is taken for granted, where no art is categorically evil, and where everything is open to change.
In the face of an oncoming wave of AI, it's essential that human artists organize and fight for labor protections. That doesn't mean an expansion of copyright law or a call for the death of AI. Rather, artists can and should demand that the future not just be AI, that the future must hold space for human labor and art. This should be a future that doesn't insist that art look one way, but one that keeps a space open for iteration, free expression, collaboration, and new collective insight. I'd much rather live in a world where AI tools are implemented and created with the help and insight of human artists, not against them. If we don't insist on this future ourselves, Disney and Adobe will insist on their own. But the art question is not the end of the AI skeptics' concerns. Maybe you're down for a reconceptualization of what art is, but there's still the question of labor, the environment, and techno-fascism. Who cares about the future of art when environmental catastrophe or fascism might ensure that there's no future at all? So let's talk about it. We started this section addressing the question of AI and meaning, moved into the question of intellectual property, and now move into the third element of the AI skeptics' concern.
AI will negatively impact labor.
With all this talk about AI replacing artists, what about AI replacing everyone else? No way a robot can push pencils better than a clinically depressed wagey. These bots can't even pick one up. Before I begin this conversation, we have to acknowledge that most of this is speculative. We don't know what the future holds. It's easy to hype up AI as world-saving or world-ending, but let's briefly address the question of labor. AI's impact on labor, who might be affected the most, and the labor that AI requires to function. Automation has always been a problem. The fucking wheel wrecked my humans carrying heavy stuff business. Good thing I just invested $10,000 in my horse-drawn carriage venture. Oftentimes, new technology doesn't explicitly replace entire sectors of labor. Usually, technology slowly transforms and augments existing industries. New technology rarely replaces the task doer. Instead, the task doer learns to do new tasks with the technology.
In much of the 20th century, automation of traditional work alongside creation of new tasks proceeded in relative balance and was foundational to wage and employment growth, underpinning shared prosperity. New technologies both displaced existing tasks and complemented humans, enabling them to perform higher quality work and generating new tasks.
Daron Acemoglu is a Nobel Prize-winning economist who argues that AI can be pro-worker, as long as we build the social and economic infrastructure that moves us in that direction.
Other economists argue that AI could moderately improve productivity and even reduce economic inequality by making skills that previously required expensive degrees accessible to more people.
For example, one thing that made doctors so goddamn expensive was their expert ability to diagnose diseases. But as we discussed earlier, some research finds that AI might actually outperform doctors' diagnostic skills. Now, if you're an AI hype cultist, you might argue that AI chatbots can and should replace the entire healthcare system. I will not look away if you beat that guy up. But if you're one of the authors of the article, "Do We Want Less Automation?" you might argue that this gives previously underpaid medical professionals like nurses access to what was thought to be an expensive and exclusive skill. AI could augment existing professionals' work and level the playing field in certain industries. I'm not a healthcare expert. I'm not going to pretend to know how this works. My arteries probably look like one of those sticks of mozzarella wrapped in salami. But I bring this up as a hypothetical example of how economists think AI could work if we give it the care and consideration it deserves. Care and consideration is key here. While AI probably isn't going to displace all labor, maybe some jobs should be automated? In 2018, anthropologist David Graeber published a book called Bullshit Jobs. In it, he argues that with the rise of contemporary neoliberal capitalism in Western economies, there's been a shift in labor from manufacturing and production to service, administration, and professional work. Graeber argues that maybe, just maybe, some of these jobs don't really need to exist and contribute nothing to the world. Maybe we weren't meant to push pencils for 2,080 hours out of the year. Take Graeber's description of his friend, for example.
He's a corporate lawyer working in a prominent New York firm. He was the first to admit that his job was utterly meaningless, contributed nothing to the world, and, in his own estimation, should not really exist. In fact, I'm not sure I've ever met a corporate lawyer who didn't think their job was bullshit.
I get the hesitation when it comes to calling certain jobs useless. I mean, there's a human-shaped demon in the current presidential administration cutting tons of government jobs to consolidate power in the executive branch. No good. But I'm not talking about cutting every single job with AI. Rather, as Graeber argues, there's no reason we need to be working this much. 9 to 5, 5 days a week just isn't necessary. Several studies show that workers can be just as productive, if not more productive, under a 4-day work week. Oh yeah, and they're a lot happier, because of course they are. Yet Americans, especially, continue to work an excess amount of hours. And for what? What exactly are we doing? There's tons of jobs in finance that just exist to track a number of a number of a number. Does that contribute to social good? Does that require wasting like 60% of a human's life? Many of you in the audience probably work a 9-to-5 desk job. Do you spend every hour of your day doing something that contributes to the world? Doesn't it feel like some jobs just exist to exist? Or that some tasks are just done to be done? What is this all for? Do you ever think about how much of your precious, singular human life you spend writing self-effacing emails? No worries if not. Of course, we have to be careful. We can't just cut things and displace millions of people with AI. First, because AI chatbots are currently liars and not capable of much of what they're proposed for. Yet. Two, because many of the people doing bullshit jobs are real people with lives and families. To build a future where labor meaningfully contributes to the world, we have to fundamentally change something about the current socioeconomic system. That's the first part. But that doesn't mean that AI has to be an antagonist in the story. What if AI is just one part of a fundamental restructuring of what labor is? What if it's the first part in restructuring the economic order towards something better? What if AI's antagonism with labor is a symptom of a larger disease in our social order that needs to be addressed? If you don't like the way that tech overlords are suggesting we use AI, then there's room to build a popular movement that demands something better. Currently, our system prioritizes efficiency because efficiency maximizes profit. But efficiency doesn't have to be a bad thing when we're talking about being efficient for good things. Of the many reasons to hate Elon Musk, one smaller one is the way he's corrupted what it means to build an administration that's efficient. While it's absolutely true that our culture of productivity and moving fast money now aligns with the shitty capitalist mindset of profit maximization, efficiency isn't necessarily a bad thing. If AI could help us with some administrative tasks so that we can reallocate resources to things like social services, then I'm on board with that. And exploring the option carefully and thoughtfully. And doing things fast doesn't always have to be a capitalist productivity culture thing when we're talking about quickly allocating resources to those who need healthcare, food, or housing. So while Musk's effort to replace government bureaucrats with AI is an authoritarian power grab, that doesn't mean that there can't be a future where the technologies we now or will call AI can't be a part of making the government and economy work for everyone. Take the example of agriculture. The digitization and automation of agriculture with AI absolutely displaces workers. Often, growers can't even afford to implement AI in agriculture, so they have to sell their farms to big venture capital firms. There's absolutely a need to address worker displacement and the consolidation of corporate power. But that's not all AI does in agriculture. When implemented well, AI can help keep food costs down and decrease agriculture's negative environmental impact. As former VP of United Farm Workers Eric Nicholson says,
simply maintaining the status quo and keeping this technology out, even if that was possible, is not a win. This industry is desperately in need of innovation and modernization, but driven from an agenda that is centered in rural communities, centered in human dignity, centered in having a vibrant food system. We want a different set of moral values. But it's the workers actually doing the work who need the skills, the ability, the competence to actually bring these ideas to the fore. So we can truly innovate agriculture in a way that builds our food system, rather than hands it over to venture capitalists.
While the worst people on Earth are the ones controlling and implementing AI, if well-intentioned people decide to completely discard the technology, the results could be disastrous. Did Karl Marx say destroy the means of production? Or did he say to seize them? But as we're talking about the labor AI displaces, we must also discuss the labor that AI requires. Tech companies would like to have you believe that AI models are shiny, enigmatic math machines. But artificial intelligence is far from artificial.
AI models require the labor of thousands of human workers tasked with labeling the quality of AI outputs, usually for little pay in exploitative conditions. OpenAI paid workers from Kenya less than $2 an hour to fine-tune its model by having them label content that included text describing violent, graphic topics racism, misogyny, torture, murder, and worse. Literally the worst possible topics you can think of. Many of these workers describe the work as mentally traumatizing, and though the company responsible for the data labeling process offered wellness counselors, their requests to see these counselors were often rejected. AI has been built on the suffering of thousands of people.
Exploitation is never necessary, natural, or just a fact of life. So what do? First, we need to acknowledge that exploitation is an inherent feature of capitalism, and we have to name the system so that we can understand our larger political goals. Capitalism is not inevitable. But what about the issue of data workers specifically? Well, just boycotting AI alone doesn't really address the issue either. Our world is embedded in oppressive global supply chains. The clothes on your back, the coffee you drank this morning, the food you eat, the device you're watching this on. In the current system, there is no escaping the human suffering that underpins your consumption. That doesn't mean throw your hands up and give in. We need to hold companies, people, and the system accountable for exploitative labor practices. To do this, we need solidarity, mutual aid, and awareness with the workers involved. Turkopticon is one such movement that advocates for the rights of data laborers who work for Amazon's Mechanical Turk platform. You can support their work right now on turkopticon.net. Get informed about the ghost work behind AI at ghostwork.org and use this knowledge to put pressure on tech companies to pay their workers a fair wage and provide quality mental health resources to those exposed to traumatizing content. And in the long term, some argue that AI might be able to replace this human labor anyways. Maybe in the long term it's a job that shouldn't exist, but that's not the best immediate solution when tons of people depend on this work to live and when many data workers specifically advocate against this. AI forces us to confront a lot of uncomfortable shit about the future, our supply chains, our work, and the people who control it all. This isn't a problem that's unique to AI, and it's one that predates generative models like ChatGPT. It's easy to point to the new tech in the room and blame it for everything, but completely rejecting AI only ensures that the worst people among us gain control of it. We need people motivated by something other than profit and control to want to see a better and equitable future in the use and development of AI. If it won't be those who want to use AI or machine learning to help restore social safety nets, then it will be Elon Musk who wants to destroy them. If it won't be agricultural communities who want to use AI to assist in producing our foods, then it will be venture capitalists. This isn't a call for AI to be the band-aid that plugs up the axe wound of our economic system. This isn't a call to uncritically use existing AI models without challenging the conditions of their production. This is a call to never surrender to the ruthless infection of capital. AI capitalism or fascism is not inevitable. Well, they can be inevitable if we don't take action. You know what else will be inevitable if we don't do anything? Environmental catastrophe, which brings us to the next of the skeptics' issues with AI.
4. AI harms the environment. Did you know that making one AI image takes as much power as fully charging your phone? Did you know one ChatGPT query needs 10 times as much electricity as a Google search? Did you know AI uses as much energy as insert small country? Did you know training ChatGPT has an equivalent energy footprint of driving 123 gasoline-powered passenger vehicles for a year?
Well, I guess I'm all right, since I only own 122 gasoline-powered passenger vehicles. One of the biggest issues people take against generative AI is its alleged environmental impact. These headlines sound pretty scary when you read them, but if you look at the numbers and the context behind them, a different picture starts to emerge.
When reading these articles, you might notice some awkward and ambiguous phrasing when the author talks about the issue. Take this sentence in an article from MIT. The International Energy Agency has estimated that global electricity demand from data centers could double between 2022 and 2026, fueled in part by AI adoption. Demand from data centers could double, fueled in part by AI. We're missing a lot of information here. Like, what is the current energy demand of data centers? How much of that is AI? Do we know how much of data center demand will be driven by AI in the future? The answers don't make as good of a headline. Data centers constitute about 1 to 1.5% of total global electricity usage. Of that 1 to 1.5%, according to our best estimates, AI consumes about 10 to 20% of data center energy. So, in terms of AI's global energy use, it would be 10 to 20% of 1 to 1.5%. a fraction of a fraction. Yet news outlets love to report on the staggering carbon emissions of AI training. It's soaring, it's thirsty, it's shocking, it's insatiable. We'll not only run out of energy, but adjectives too. One of the first studies to bring attention to this issue was published in 2019. The problems with this article and the media reaction exemplify a recurring pattern that needs to stop. Researchers from the University of Amherst evaluated the carbon emissions of training an AI model for neural architecture search, or NAS. It's a pretty specialized method for designing models. They estimated that it required a thirsty, shocking, insatiable 155,000 pounds of CO2 emissions, or the equivalent of 300 round-trip transcontinental American flights. Then came the headlines. Training a single AI model can emit as much carbon as 5 cars in their lifetimes. Creating an AI can be 5 times worse for the planet than a car. To decarbonize, we must decomputerize. Why we need a Luddite revolution. But a 2021 article demonstrates that the original 2019 article made a major mistake in assuming that NAS searches for architectures using full-scale models, when in reality, researchers often use smaller proxy models to speed up the process and reduce costs. Basically, the original article's estimates were wrong. The 2019 researchers made an assumption that led to them overestimating the AI model's emissions, which ended up being up to 88 times smaller than initially thought. But no big outlets reported this error. Instead, they continued to run with the original angle. The first author of the study later expressed regret about the media firestorm that their article caused.
So to my surprise, this paper got a huge amount of press coverage and tons of citations. And while I'm glad that we helped bring attention to the potential environmental impact of these models, unfortunately, I think because our work was targeted for a very technical audience, there's been a lot of sort of hyperbole and misunderstandings about the actual implications of our work.
Yet the mischaracterization of AI's environmental impact continues. I want to make something clear. It's not bad to care about the environmental impact of artificial intelligence. We should always be aware of the ways capitalist industry requires the overconsumption of natural resources. It's good that AI researchers are interested in this issue. With that in mind, I want to make a few claims. 1. Generative AI is not uniquely or exceptionally bad for the environment. 2. Our means of measuring AI's current environmental impact are not very precise. 3. Our means of measuring AI's future environmental impact are even worse. 4. The consequences of overestimating AI's future environmental impact can be just as bad as underestimating them. 5. Many of these problems would be mitigated if tech companies were more transparent. And you might be thinking, well, who cares? If anti-AI backlash pressures tech companies into implementing sustainable practices, does it really matter? Well, it turns out that lies have consequences. Bad reporting, even for a seemingly good cause, can backfire in horrific ways.
When we're talking about AI and the environment, we have to consider 2 different factors. First, there's the demand for AI, which most sources estimate will increase in the coming years. But then there's the issue of energy efficiency. As AI develops, we learn new tricks that make the hardware or software more efficient at doing what it does, which allows it to take up less energy overall. We've already seen improvements in energy efficiency when it comes to AI, but it's difficult to speculate about how future demand will balance compared to efficiency improvements. But what about current energy use? Is generative AI really an energy hog? Well, to my knowledge, not exactly. There are 2 categories of use when it comes to AI: inference and training. Inference basically means using the AI model as a user. The energy cost of inference varies from model to model.
With stable diffusion, generating one image takes about 3 watt-hours. One ChatGPT request takes anywhere from 0.3 to 3 watt-hours.
Wait, a what hour? No, a watt hour. The number is a bit unintuitive, which is why people make scary headlines instead.
You may have heard that using AI takes 10 times as much energy as a Google search. The original research article by Alex DeVries has been cited by countless journalists, but there's tons of problems with it. In DeVries' article, the famous 10 times more energy than a Google search figure comes from a quote by Alphabet's chairman, where they say that interacting with an LLM could likely cost 10 times more than a standard keyword search. But this quote is referring to financial cost, not energy. DeVries then cites a confirmed figure on Google's energy costs in 2009 and multiplies it by 10 to suggest a new figure. But That's not how it works. You can't extrapolate energy costs from financial costs. We don't know if it scales in the same way. You can't take some guy's guesstimate about something, multiply it by 10, and apply that number to a completely different thing. And the cited figure for the energy use of a Google search is from 2009. It's been over a decade. It's highly likely that this figure has significantly changed since 2009, in any direction. I mean, haven't we all? In 2009, I was a girl. But De Vries provides other citations to support his claims. These citations have problems too. De Vries bases one of his figures on research done by semi-analysis, which assumes that the average ChatGPT response is about 1,500 words, but the average length is really more around 200 words, which significantly throws off the calculations. Semi-analysis also bases their calculations on unconfirmed model parameter counts and older, less efficient hardware. On top of that, De Vries calculations assume that AI data centers use these GPUs at maximum power, but they don't. Models like GPT-4o are typically run on highly optimized setups that don't usually run on maximum power at all times. De Vries himself gives this caveat in the paper, but doesn't factor that into his calculations. So this is probably wrong. When you factor in batching, idle time, and actual user behavior, more recent estimates suggest that a ChatGPT query might use as little as 0.3 watt-hours, literally the same amount as a Google search from 2009, not 10 times more. Oh no! ChatGPT gulps up a whole water bottle every time you talk to it? Journalists love to bring attention to this fact by actually wasting a bottle of water. Why is this man in pain? You don't have to do this. First, we have to consider that the water used to power the data centers behind ChatGPT isn't destroyed. Some of the water used in the data center cooling process evaporates and the rest is recycled. And not all of the water used by data centers are taken from the shaking lips of children. Some data centers utilize useless wastewater in their cooling processes. But where does this figure come from? The Washington Post was the first to popularize the claim that generating a 100-word email with GPT-4 requires 519 milliliters of water, or roughly an entire water bottle. The authors of the article claimed to have collaborated with researchers who worked on a 2023 article on GPT-3's water use. The original paper claimed that GPT-3 consumes about 500 milliliters of water for 10 to 50 medium-length responses. But the Washington Post article focuses on GPT-4, not GPT-3. So, how was this new figure calculated? After a friendly correspondence with the researcher who worked on this article, I found that the source of this claim lies with an online calculator that computes different LLMs' environmental impact. Though the methodology of this calculator is solid, the actual figures may not be. Estimating the consumption of big proprietary models like GPT-4 carry tons of uncertainties because OpenAI just doesn't release this information. To be clear, they should. This is their fault. But that leaves the creators of this calculator and other researchers in a tough position. Like here, they estimate the parameters for GPT-4 to be in the trillions, based on an unconfirmed leak. And even then, their assumption that the active parameters are 550 billion isn't based on anything. And that's a really important part of calculating energy use. We don't know what the actual parameter numbers are. There's a good chance these numbers are highly inaccurate. Not to mention the fact that the main ChatGPT model is now GPT-4o, which is way more energy efficient than GPT-4. There are so many more claims we could debunk or show the ways they're misrepresented, but I think it's better to put this all into perspective. Even if we assume the water consumed by ChatGPT is actually half a liter of water per query, and even if we ignored the fact that many data centers use closed-loop cooling systems, let's compare this figure to the water consumed in producing a single hamburger. 1,695 liters of water for one goddamn burger. One! But as we discussed, water use isn't the best metric since water is typically recycled. Energy use is a better metric. And again, generative AI just isn't exceptional here. Compare one ChatGPT query's estimated 0.3 to 3 watt-hours of energy use to video games. Playing a video game for 2 hours consumes about 1,000 watt-hours of electricity.
Did you know watching 1 hour of online video consumes 77 watt-hours hours of electricity. How long is this video again?
The carbon footprint of ChatGPT writing one page is less than writing one page yourself on a laptop. The footprint of using an AI image generator to make one image is less than using digital art software or traditional artistic tools. I mean, just think about it. Do you think it's more energy intensive to generate a few AI images or to drive to an art store, buy paint produced through an industrial process, drive home, and light your house while you paint? Why is it that people insist on making ChatGPT some uniquely new environmental evil? So far, we've been talking about individual AI use. But what about training?
Here, we're talking millions of kilowatt hours for training one large language model like ChatGPT. Unfortunately, we live in a capitalist society, which means that there isn't just one model that's trained once, but a bunch of different models that companies are racing to train again and again so that they can claim to dominate the marketplace. And while I'm not going to say that all AI training is useless, there is no reason why every single tech company feels as if they need to develop the next big general purpose model and shove it into all their products. That's greed. That's shit. There's no problem with being pissed off about this. But even then, in context, AI constitutes a pretty small fraction of global energy use, and we really don't know what the future will hold in terms of efficiency or demand. While we hear tons of scary projections, the headlines only serve to tell whatever story the author wants to tell you. We need to understand one important truth about AI and energy. There really is no good way to definitively measure the current share of AI energy consumption, and it's even more difficult to measure future AI consumption. The author of one often cited research article, The Growing Energy Footprint of Artificial Intelligence, expressed concern over the lack of data.
I think every researcher on this topic is going crazy because we're not getting the data we need. We're just doing our best, trying all kinds of tricks to come up with some kind of number. One recent article comprehensively describes the different shortcuts media outlets and researchers use to estimate AI data center use and show how each has significant flaws. Ironically, we just don't have enough data on data centers. Without better data, energy analysts may be forced to take several shortcuts that are more uncertain, less explanatory, less defensible, and less useful to policymakers, investors, the media, and the public.
We absolutely need to pressure tech companies into higher transparency about their practices, including public access to data on data centers. But that doesn't mean that we have to make hasty declarations. And even so, our current best estimates don't paint as drastic a picture as the media. Here's where I want to sound the alarm bells. As with most of the AI discourse, we're being sold this picture that AI is a story about big tech versus the environment. But these sensational headlines and the environmental panic might actually benefit corporate actors and even exacerbate environmental impact in unexpected ways.
There's a reason these tech companies aren't coming out and debunking these numbers or engaging in more transparent practices. They might actually benefit from the narrative that their products are energy hogs.
Notice who keeps getting cited in these articles projecting soaring AI energy consumption. Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs, McKinsey, financial giants, people positioned to profit. Institutions with investment portfolios in energy stocks. Invest, invest, invest. While it's true that data center demand will likely increase due in part to AI, state utilities and energy companies are highly incentivized to exaggerate their future projections and encourage overbuilding.
On average, the forecast from utilities of how much electricity demand will grow is overestimated by 2.5 percentage points year after year after year. And again, there's just a structural incentive to do that on the part of utilities that need to justify capital investment in order to make their money. That's just the incentive structure that we have created for them as a society, and they're responding to that.
Panic articles about AI energy use and environmental catastrophe ironically contribute to this hype. But again, we don't really know what's going to happen. We know that there's going to be growth, but we don't know what it's going to look like. There could be massive increases in efficiency. The release of DeepSeek showed that AI models may not require massive amounts of energy to train. Maybe that increases overall demand for AI, maybe the efficiency gains level things out.
Many of the AI environmental catastrophe articles cite the International Energy Agency's estimates on AI energy use, but there can be huge variability in their projections. Computing expert Jonathan Koomey spoke about the IEA's projections on a recent climate podcast.
The International Energy Agency did these projections. They did 2 of them in 2024, and they started by trying to do history, and they looked at 2022, and the first study they released in January had a number that was 50% greater than the second study that they released in October. And so even the same institution, looking at a historical year, had this uncertainty.
Yet, the people claiming to predict what's going to happen are often the people who stand to benefit from growth. Some of the IEA's estimates cite questionable sources for their AI growth forecast.
Pretty credible organizations like the International Energy Agency, they don't release the data, they don't release the calculations in any explicit way. And so that's kind of the first question people should ask is, can I figure out what these people assume? Usually what they're assuming is NVIDIA's business plan is our growth forecast. For AI, they're just saying, well, NVIDIA has this projection for the next few years of how many AI nodes they're going to sell. And they just use that and say, that's what's happening. And of course, there's uncertainty in that.
Yeah, there are problems with estimating future AI energy use by citing NVIDIA's business plan. Obviously, a major GPU manufacturer is going to push for growth in the AI sector. Plus, we don't know how that hardware is going to be used. Will tech become more efficient? Who knows? You might as well invest in beans. Legumes never go out of style.
Again and again, you'll see articles using uncertain projections from sources who want you to believe that the AI energy crisis is around the corner. Hype can happen on any side of this debate, so we have to be careful before uncritically falling off any particular cliff. Right now, wild predictions by utility companies about future AI energy use is justifying investment in gas-fired power plants.
These predictions aren't happening in a vacuum. At the same time that investment bankers and environmentalists have fretted over a potential electricity shortage, utilities across the South have proposed a de facto solution: a massive build-out of new natural gas power plants.
So while it might appear that any effective environmentalist should proclaim AI's energy use as the new frontier of the climate battle, these exaggerated articles and proclamations may actually, in practice, end up fueling the hype around an industry that might contribute far more environmental harm.
I declared a national energy emergency, and it's so important. And the big problem is we need double the energy we currently have in the United States. Can you imagine? For AI to really be as big as we want to have it.
The risk of focusing on AI specifically as a driver of load growth is that because it's a hot new technology, it can rhetorically justify expensive emergency action that is actually not necessary at all. There are real risks if AI's energy demands get overstated and utilities go on a gas-driven bender. The first is for the planet. Utilities might overbuild gas plants now, run them even though they're non-economic, and blow through their climate goals.
Now maybe, if we want to stay #positive, there might be a good outcome from all this. A lot of tech companies are seeking more efficient and less scarce energy resources to meet potential demand. The increased building of data centers might lead us to building more sustainable energy infrastructures or making new environmentally positive breakthroughs. But that's a big might. Curiously though, we've already had this conversation about the internet.
Forbes, 1999. Dig more coal. The PCs are coming. Somewhere in America, a lump of coal is burned every time a book is ordered online. Except that turned out to be a lie. All the exaggerated claims about the internet's energy use were lies. Why do we keep doing this?
In 1999, bombastic claims surfaced that the internet was about to overwhelm the electric grid, eat up half of the energy in the next decade. What happened? The portion of energy used by the internet did increase, but not by the amount predicted. And electricity demand in America actually stayed constant in the following decades. When it comes to scary headlines that claim to know the future, there's one thing we can be certain about. No one really knows what's in store. AI itself can also help address climate change. Predictive AI could help make the energy grid more efficient, reducing energy consumption overall. As we discussed earlier, AI's potential to innovate in agriculture has huge benefits in terms of helping the industry become more environmentally sustainable, reduce food waste, and enhance the nutritional value of ingredients. We do not have to surrender the future to gloom. We can certainly pressure companies to build sustainable resources, research ways AIs could help us with the climate crisis, and make it clear that we don't want 5,000 giant general-purpose models that all do the same thing. And we can push companies to be more transparent about their practices. But the risk of overstating AI's future impact as an energy hog could be tremendous. Over-exaggerated statements about how ChatGPT is destroying the world are not only misrepresentations of reality. As we can see, they serve an energy grid hype machine that does have the potential to destroy the world.
This narrative artificially pumps up energy stocks, helps big tech secure more data centers, and encourages the expansion of unsustainable energy sources.
If you really do care about the environment, and you should, hating on AI for this particular reason is not the way to go. You would make a much greater impact by not eating meat for like 1 day a week. Even better, don't eat meat at all. Live a car-free lifestyle. If you can't, encourage your city to change its zoning laws and invest in public transit so that more cities can go car-free. Or fucking carpool. If you really care about the environment, you should all focus less on calling anyone who touches AI ontologically evil and start hating cars. I hate you! My critique of critiques does not mean to absolve blame of the actors involved. If Google is going back on their climate goals, let's hold them accountable. If someone is using AI to impersonate an existing artist, let's hold them accountable. We shouldn't let malicious actors hide behind AI to avoid confronting the consequences of their actions, but to avoid and malign the technology completely in a way that goes against the very values we claim to profess, we have a problem. I genuinely think that we could build a promising technological mass movement that transforms our economic, social, and political structure. I'm not saying that ChatGPT is going to be the hero of that story. We will be. But the technology currently called AI, whether generative or predictive, is not the enemy. And it could absolutely play a role in making the world a better place. We should be inspired to envision beyond the bounds of the current social order. And AI provides one opportunity to do just that. It is possible to work toward a technologized post-capitalism without succumbing to shareholder hype. Because if it's not going to be us, it's going to be them. In the second and final act of this video, we tackle the last of the AI skeptics' points, AI's role in the rise of contemporary fascism. We'll answer the question of what exactly is happening in the second Trump administration and how we got here. What's our plan going to look like? Or do we think going back to business as usual is a legitimate option? Right now, a group of powerful players are investing everything they have into destroying the US government and installing themselves at the top. We live in an urgent political moment. Why do the techno-fascists think the way they do? What role does AI play in their plans? And importantly, how do we stop that?
If you enjoyed this video, you can support the work on this channel at patreon.com/aretheygay. There you'll find exclusive videos, a regular podcast where I talk with fellow creators, and you'll access monthly discussion groups where I talk directly with viewers like you. This channel is free to watch, but it is not free to produce. So thank you to my current patrons for making this possible. Owen K, Six Slugs, AE, AFK Bard, Aiden Kadzierski, Aiden Lisandro, Eluri, Alex Halverson, Alina Alpine, All Pizzas Are Personal, Alnara, Amaranta, Andre Alves, Andrea Schreiber, Annalisa Koenig, Antonio Saservic, Arapaima Slim, Ari Lord Piru, Armin Ritchie, Arto, Ash Finn, Ataplease, Avery, Barbecutie, Bartolos Flute, Beerick, Beatrice Dahl, Benjamin Perry, Bert Spielpenning, Beilua, Bitchy, Bobby Jane Disforges, Brandon Uzumaki, Bubble Boy, Cat Girls, Casey, Kaylin S., Cece Troye, C. Schaefer, Celeste Irwin, Charles Hero, Charlie Rose, Charlotte, Cheese Boy, Chloe, Chris Scalzi, Christopher D., Sinister, Cliff, Cody Miller, Cucumber, Curious Glaistig, Dan, Danny Chalice, Daniel Torma, Kidney, Daniela De Leon, Danielle McDonnell, David Sanchez, December Vesalius, DJ, Don Hopkins, Dorothy Madeline Gale, Draenix, Dropout Ninja, Easy, Alyssa, L. Nolan, Emil England, Eric Juna Home, Eric J. Moffat, Aaron Grace, Ermine, Ethan Fritz, Even Blum, Eyes of a Tragedy, Fat Kirk, Faye Kingit, Fickle Harpy, 5 Raccoons in a Trench Coat, Florencia Rumpel Rodriguez, Frey, Gabby D'Amico, Gabriela Surita, Gian Balong, Gibran Essa, Gray Rainier, Griff Q, Heather, host of Craftlit, Heather Frasechild, Helen Ashby, Henry, Hida, Hogg, Hope Jason Tuliana, Hunter Mon, I Am Good Enough, Ian T. Gray, If Being Gay is a Phase, then the moon is definitely a lesbian, Ipsy, Irritated Nick, Jack Beck, Jack Bennett, Jake Vossen, Jamin Flood, Janelle ZC, Janan, Jeff Sheehy, Jenny Tang, Jess, Gemini's Journal, Jinkies, Jocelyn Esther 4, Joshua Clark, Josta, Joxon S. Costello, Joy Palmer, Juicebox08, Julie Warner, Julia Herzog, Julia Lavender, Junior, Justin Chapman, Justin Nickel, Cara Goolsby, Katie Korn, Kayla Barnes, Kilmani, Kenzie Woodbridge, Kiara Williams, Knock Knock Nux, Kurtz Harem, Laura Bauma, Lauren Walsh, Lave, Liam, Lynn Shee, Lindsay Mercer, Liz Hirschman, Blizzard Lee, Logan Lind, Luca, Luce, Lucid, Maddie Reyes, Mahala Byrne, Malpertuous, Mandy Thompson, Manway, Marcus Preston, Mark Mason, Mary Mings, Mars Rover, Maz Swift, Megan Lowndes, Mel, Michael Gillespie, Meek, Mingo, Momo Mateo, Misadventure, Muhammad Amari, Muhan, Naomio, Narwerg, Nicholas Bloom, Nick H., Nolan Widmer, Nifan, Omar Apollo Strongest Soldier, Oyster Philosophy, Patrick Luce, Paul D. Hunt, Penguin with a Tie, Haraspera, Phantom Flavor, Phil E., Plato in the Rave, Quack 7777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777777. Rich Eat the, Richard Knight, River, Robot Spock, Rocket Cambria, Rosa Mori of the Sea, RSS, SH, Sabrina Ryan, Sam Gersel, Sarah Moss, Sarah S. Max, Scout O'Keefe, Sean Petrick, Serena Stiber, SG, Shane Anderson, Shemi, Sydney Gay, Simon, Sophie Huberts, Spike C, Spinoli, Spooky Doo, Sunshine Type, Tanner Clark, Tash, Teresa Banos, The Mandalorian, Think Peace Tribe, Thug Pug 43, Tim Barnett, Timo, Tony Gallagher, Tony Whitson, Torrance R, Travis, Trixie, Tiger Lemux, Tyler Edwards, Uardito, Umaima Beige, Valued Customer, Victoria McCreary, Vince, Vivid Disciple, Vivki, Wainoa, William Thomas, Yolane, Yona, Yori,